Chapter 490. As soon as Shen Lintu finished his sentence, he immediately launched an attack. He waved his sleeves, and hundreds of yin-yang flying daggers appeared. Cold lights flashed as they slashed down. The dragon carp's body was huge, so it couldn't dodge in time. All the daggers landed on its back, and the sound of metal clashing could be heard. However, the golden scales on its body were extremely sturdy, and the flying daggers shattered into balls of qi that dissipated. They couldn't even leave a mark on its body. This demon didn't differentiate friend or foe, but because Shen Lintu destroyed the jade purple hairpin flower, it just now Shen Lintu was especially hostile towards him. Now that it attacked, it was infuriated. It let out a roar, and the huge tail behind it whipped up a strong wind and huge waves. Shen Lintu had already suffered once, so he didn't dare to take it head-on. He wanted to escape from the side, but he had only moved a few feet when Zhang Yan waved his sleeves, and the water element true light swung out. Shen Lintu's body was pulled back, and he couldn't dodge it. His back was hit hard again, and he fell again. Who knew that after he suffered this loss, he didn't make a sound, and instead, he cast a spell and hurriedly flew away on the light. At this moment, he also realized that if Zhang Yan and the dragon carp worked together to make things difficult for him, he wouldn't be able to stop it. Therefore, he wanted to leave this place first, and settle the score with the two later. Zhang Yan took a lot of effort to drag him into the pit, so how could he let him go? He took a step forward and used the art of teleportation to appear in front of the dragon carp. He raised the star's sword ball in the air, and was about to slash from afar. At the same time, he raised his hand to shoot out a bolt of purple heaven thunder. Shen Lintu saw a bolt of purple light coming towards him, and its momentum was unparalleled. He had no choice but to stop and defend. However, at this moment, the dragon carp old demon suddenly let out a fierce roar. He opened his mouth and spat out a dark red light. After it went up to the sky, it dispersed into the air, and turned into a thick cloud that looked like fire. Below them, the seawater seemed to be steaming, turning into mist that rose in spirals. The water within a radius of dozens of miles was completely enveloped in mist. Shen Lin's expression involuntarily tightened. He recognized that it was a mouthful of essence yuan luo qi that the dragon carp had cultivated in its stomach. This qi could be big or small, it could disperse or gather, it was extremely tough and hard to break. Normally, when it was released, it could easily pull back the water creatures within 100 miles to feed it. If he was enveloped by this aura, even with his cultivation, he wouldn't dare to say that he would be able to escape. Although this energy couldn't injure the enemy, if he was dragged into the deep sea and fought, he would be at a great disadvantage. Thus, he didn't dare to hesitate and immediately fled. Zhang Yan saw that the demonic clouds covered the sky and rolled over, as if it wanted to gather the sea and sky together. He didn't know what it was, but he could tell that this qi was extremely unusual. If he stayed here, he would probably be dragged into it. Thus, he leaped up and turned into a ray of auspicious light that rushed out of the sky. In his heart, he thought, at this level of cultivation, there seems to be a technique that can trap the heaven and earth. If a cultivator doesn't have an escape technique in hand, it would be difficult to compete with it. Thinking of this, he suddenly remembered that the 5 elements escape technique that he had learned seemed to have such a technique, and he seemed to have understood something. The demonic clouds gradually closed, and in a flash, there was only a small gap left. But the two of them were extremely fast. If there were no accidents, they would be able to rush out before the encirclement. Not long after, Zhang Yan arrived at the edge of the Yuan Luo Qi. It seemed that he would be able to escape in another 1,000 feet. At this moment, he turned his head and saw that Shen Lintu was also flying towards him in the form of a ray of light. Suddenly, he moved horizontally and blocked the way out. He pointed his finger at Shen Lintu and a bolt of purple heaven thunder came down. Shen Lintu saw that Zhang Yan was in front of him and had been holding back. He originally wanted to sneak up on him, but he didn't expect that Zhang Yan would make the first move. At this moment, if he dodged, he would definitely not be able to get out of here. Thus, he cursed in his heart and forcibly endured the thunder technique. The shock caused his body to sway, but he still rushed up. Who knew that Zhang Yan would not let him go, and consecutively sent out a few more thunder techniques. He had no choice but to circulate his mana to resist, and said, "Zhang Yan, this old demon can't distinguish good from evil, and can't distinguish friend from foe. Don't think that it will help you. If there are any grievances between us, we can talk about it when we get out of here." Zhang Yan smiled, yet he didn't reply, and the attacks in his hands became swifter instead. Shen Lin saw the crack closing up smaller and smaller, yet he was extremely anxious in his heart. How could he be willing to be entangled with Zhang Yan here? He relied on his profound mana to hold the defensive treasured light firmly before opening his mouth and spitting out. Suddenly, a blade light that was like a rainbow shot out from within the lightning, and it shot straight towards Zhang Yan's face. Zhang Yan knew that once he dodged, he would surely allow Shen Lin to have a chance to charge out. At that time, being unable to stop Shen Lin was a small matter, and if Shen Lin were to leave this place first, then Shen Lin would surely turn around and try to block him here. So he didn't dodge, and his expression focused as he tossed the world leaf before circulating the mana in his entire body, causing the treasured clothes on his body to glow brilliantly, and it just happened to be like a bright moon that hung in the sky, dazzling to the extreme. When the brilliance arrived, a clear cry resounded out as the world leaf was actually blasted away, whereas the brilliance lost all its momentum. Zhang Yan glanced over and saw that it was a willow leaf-shaped small blade that seemed to be made from snow, and it didn't hurt or itch as it slashed once on the defensive treasured light on his body before flying back. Shen Lin stuck out his tongue and licked it before placing the small blade back into his mouth, and then he charged forward once more. He hadn't moved forward for more than 10 m when he saw the scene before his eyes darken as a large hand that was completely condensed from yellow smoke appeared, and it was like a mountain that pressed down towards him. He hurriedly rubbed his hand, causing a sharp blade light to fly out and tear open a path, and then he flicked his sleeve and rode the light to dash forward. But just now, he just leaped over when he saw another yellow light that lay across his path, and he gritted his teeth hatefully after being obstructed time and time again. But at this moment, he couldn't be bothered to curse, and he commanded over 100 blade lights to slash forward with the intention of breaking open a path. But this light seemed extremely thick, and the blades were actually unable to slash it apart, causing his originally flying forward like an arrow to be unable to avoid becoming sluggish. At this moment, when Zhang Yan noticed that the demon cloud was about to retract, he circulated the minor universe teleportation in an unhurried manner and instantly flashed out, and he didn't forget to strike down a few bolts of divine lightning before he left. By the time Shen Lin broke through the earth element true light and rushed to the exit, he was once again struck by the divine lightning and was forced back a few steps. He could only watch helplessly as the demon cloud closed up, and with a loud rumble, he disappeared without a trace. When Zhang Yan got out of the circle of clouds in order to prevent the old demon from turning back to find trouble with him, he made use of the water to escape tens of miles away, and then flew across the sky. After a few rounds, he found a nameless island to land on, sat on a high point, and watched the battle from afar. Although he was separated by such a long distance, he could still hear the rumbling echoes of the sea, and it was obvious that the battle between the two was extremely intense. At this moment, the essence of the chi that enveloped the sea was gradually shrinking, and from afar, it looked like a pouch. When it was about an acre in size, the old demon could be seen holding the chi in its mouth, swaying its body and sinking into the sea, and after a while, it disappeared. When Zhang Yan saw this, he was slightly shocked. He knew that there was something strange about the red chi, but he didn't expect it to be so powerful that Shen Lin actually couldn't escape. The dragon carp was an aquatic demon, and its ability in the sea was a few times stronger than on land. This time, Shen Lin might not be able to get away. Zhang Yan shook his head and smiled. Even if this person could escape, he would probably have exhausted a lot of his vitality. He only needed to patiently adjust his breathing and wait for the outcome of the battle to be decided. Just like that, he waited for more than 10 days. The sea was still calm, and there was no one coming out. The dragon carp was also nowhere to be seen, as if it was no longer breathing. Zhang Yan was also surprised, and he muttered to himself, could it be that Shen Daoren escaped from somewhere else? This was not impossible. The dragon carp had lived on the East Sea for thousands of years, and it was not that there were no almighty people who had designs on it before. It was just that this demon's cultivation was not shallow, and it also had the ability to hide in the deep sea, which made it difficult to capture. If the two of them went somewhere else when they were fighting under the sea, it would be difficult to find any trace of them. He thought, I'll wait for another 10 days, and if there's still no trace of them, then there's no need to wait anymore. After another 5 days, he suddenly saw spiritual vigor surging on the surface of the sea, as if the water was boiling. He couldn't help but stand up and take a look. There were large patches of blood on the surface of the water, and it almost dyed the entire sea red. Not only that, there were hundreds of broken pieces of whale that were the size of a palm floating up to the surface. Zhang Yan took a few glances, and he grabbed a scale with his hand. He put it under his eyes and saw that it was dazzling with golden light, and it was unusually sturdy and flexible, yet as light as a feather. However, there were still bloodstains on it, and it was the golden scale of the dragon carp. He squinted his eyes, and it seemed that the dragon carp was severely injured, but he didn't know how Shenlintu was doing. After waiting for another half an hour, there was suddenly a water column that shot up to the sky, and there was a silhouette in it. As soon as he left the sea, he hurried towards the northwest direction. Zhang Yan took a closer look, and looking at the silhouette, it was no doubt Shenlintu. However, at this moment his Taoist bun was in a mess, and his robe was tattered and full of holes. A light flashed in Zhang Yan's eyes. Shenlintu came here in Yuanying Dharmakaya, and the robe that he was wearing was condensed from mana. However, at this moment he didn't even repair it. One could imagine how poor he was. As he thought about this, he leaped and chased after him, but he was always cautious, so he only followed far behind and didn't chase after him. He observed carefully along the way, and he found some clues. Shenlintu's Dharmakaya's figure and appearance were similar to a real person, but at this moment, it was flickering like a shadow, as if a gust of wind could blow it away. Not only that, when he flew and soared, he was swaying and stumbling, and it was obvious that he was severely injured. After seeing through this person's actual situation, Zhang Yan wouldn't be polite anymore. He activated his Xian Qi, and with a loud bang, Yuanying flew out from the top of the door. Among the 5-colored brilliance behind him, a blue ray fell and surged forward. Shenlintu looked back in shock, and he couldn't help but be shocked. He didn't expect that not only did Zhang Yan not leave, but he was also waiting for him here. Seeing that there seemed to be a boundless giant wave coming from the blue ray, he couldn't avoid it in time, so he quickly activated his Xian Qi and rode on the treasure light to stabilize his body, so that he wouldn't fall into it. Zhang Yan laughed loudly. He shook his shoulder, and among the 5-colored brilliance behind him, there was a glaring red ray that flashed across the sky. It was like a great flame, and with just a touch, the protective treasure light was burned away. Shenlintu was shocked, but he still had some mana left in him, so he summoned the treasure light again. However, the red ray swept over again, and with a sweep, the treasure light was destroyed again. After going back and forth for 3 to 4 times, Shenlintu felt that his strength was not as good as his will, and with a moment of carelessness, he was hit by the flame, and with a cry, he fell down. Zhang Yan shouted, and with a shake of his sleeve, he threw the heaven and earth leaf down, and with a flash of golden light, he was covered in it. Chapter 491. A hint of coldness appeared in Zhang Yan's eyes. In this battle, he had to kill Shenlintu's avatar no matter what. Otherwise, once it escaped and recuperated for a period of time, it might come looking for trouble with him again. Although he had enveloped it within the heaven and earth leaf, he also knew that this alone wouldn't be enough to kill this avatar. Yuanying avatars were different from flesh and blood. They were formed from the essence of a cultivator's lifetime of cultivation. After being injured, as long as it wasn't damaged at all, it wouldn't take long for it to recover after finding a secluded place to absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. From this, it could be seen that the dragon carp under the sea was most likely not dead. It might still have some battle power left. That was why Shenlintu rushed out in a hurry. He didn't even have the chance to stop and catch his breath. The 5-colored brilliance behind Zhang Yan turned. that fire-like red light landed again and circled around the golden light released by the heaven and earth leaf. Chapter 228, True Fire Refining Dharma Body diving into the sea to capture the dragon carp facing the sky. If seen from afar, it would seem as though a bonfire had been lit in the sky, dyeing the clouds red and the sky red. He sat on top of the cloud and performed a hand seal, controlling the fire and sending it into the golden light. Shen Lintu was trapped in the heaven and earth leaf. Because of the great battle earlier, his transcendence energy was lacking. He couldn't break out for a while. However, even though he was in this state, he still forced himself to be calm. He didn't think that Zhang Yan could do anything to him. He was still thinking of a way to escape. It wasn't until the true light of fire came in that he realized something was wrong. If this fire came in contact with even a little, it would definitely burn away some of his essence. Even if he used his protective light, it would be useless. It would be melted the moment it came in contact with him. Instead, it would speed up the pace of his death. He hurriedly took out a pearl from his mouth and held it in front of his chest. It released a circle of brilliance that covered his entire body. He barely managed to hold on. A moment later, the pearl shattered into powder with a kacha sound, and the tongue of flames licked up. After a few brushes, his body, which was already somewhat unstable, became even dimmer. Seeing that the red flame was burning brighter and brighter like a furnace, if this continued, he would definitely be refined here. Only then did he completely panic, shouting in panic, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, if there's something you want to say, we can talk about it. Why do you have to make things difficult for this old Taoist?" He waited for a while but didn't get a response. He became even more anxious and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, if you want the Yin-killing saber, Daoren can make the decision to give it to you. In the future, I guarantee that no disciple of my monastery will cause trouble for you. If you let me out, Daoren will owe you a favor. How about it?" Zhang Yan snorted coldly and did not reply. Subsequently, no matter if Shen Lintu begged, threatened, or lured him with treasures, he ignored all of them. Seeing that Shen Lintu still had the strength to speak, he increased the activation of his transcendence energy. For hours later, there was no longer any sound coming from the golden light. However, Zhang Yan still did not relax. The heaven and earth leaf and his mind were connected, so he naturally knew the changes in the situation inside. After all, Shen Lintu had spent hundreds of years cultivating the Dharma body. Its foundation was exceptionally strong. Even now, it had not been destroyed. It was still accumulating power and waiting, as if it was waiting for the moment he was careless to break out. After cultivating for another half an hour, Shen Lintu saw that his body was faintly discernible. He knew that the outcome was already decided. His face involuntarily revealed a look of despair and ruthlessness. He let out a wild laugh and said, "Zhang Yan, you destroyed my Dharma body. From now on, my disciples will not rest until you are dead. Just you wait." As soon as he finished speaking, countless rays of fire surged up. With the sound of an explosion, his body suddenly exploded, turning into countless strands of essence energy that dissipated. There were also several magical treasures that flew out, but they were blocked by the golden curtain of light, unable to escape. The universe leaf swayed a few times before it stabilized. Zhang Yan shouted and pointed with his finger. The 9 captions devil slip flew out. As soon as it appeared, there was celestial music in the sky, like clear spring water. It paused for a moment before it was thrown into the golden light. After a while, the devil slip absorbed all the essence chi and turned into a ray of spiritual light. It spun out and returned to his hand. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand and stroked the jade slip. He had already figured out the details of Shen Lintu's Dharma body. Because there was no person's primordial spirit in it, he knew that this time he did not completely kill this elder of Chongyue True Temple. When a Qi cultivator reached the 3rd stage of Yuanying, there was a benefit. The deity level could sit in the cave and cultivate while the Dharma body could travel the world. This way, it would not delay the cultivation. It could also travel the mountains and rivers, the earth, the deep swamps and ponds, looking for those rare external objects for cultivation. Some bold cultivators would simply find a secret cave to hide their body and use the Dharma body to travel with their primordial spirit. This way, the power of the Dharma body would not be reduced. However, there were also some cautious people who only separated a strand of their primordial spirit and attached it to the Dharma body. Although the supernatural power and mana that they could cast were not as good as the former, it was better in that it was safe and would not be destroyed after being killed. When Tao Zhenren was on the East Sea, he used the Dharma body to fight the enemy. His primordial spirit was still left in the real body to wait for the birth of the immortal abode. It was also because of this that his combat power was slightly weaker. Otherwise, the 3 Yuanying elders who besieged him would not have been able to last until the moment he achieved the immortal abode. Shen Lintu was a steady person. He did the same. Although the Dharma body was destroyed, his primordial spirit was not lost. His life was still preserved. However, after this disaster, it was equivalent to him losing half of his cultivation. Yuanying cultivators only had a lifespan of about 1,000 years. Unless there was a treasure of heaven and earth or a great opportunity, it would be difficult to cultivate back before his lifespan came to an end. Zhang Yan thought that even if Shen Lintu did not die this time, it would be difficult for him to achieve anything in the next hundreds of years. Even so, this Daoren could reincarnate no matter how bad he was. He was not like the cultivators who were killed by him before. Even their primordial spirits could not escape. Zhang Yan was also emotional. When one cultivated to this level, not only was his mana strong, it was like he had an extra life. Actually, only a disciple of a big sect like him would have such thoughts. Even if the cultivators from other sects cultivated to this level, they would only be extra careful. They would not dare to put their corporeal bodies in the abode to cultivate. Once the Yuanying Dharma body left the body, the deity level would become extremely weak. If someone came to destroy it, the deity would not be able to fight back. Cultivation of the great Tao, one could not lack Dharma partner, wealth, and land. Not to mention the supernatural power and cultivation items, a good cultivation abode could not only be nourished by spiritual power, but also set up a prohibition array. When the owner left the abode, they would not have to worry about others attacking them. For example, the clear nether heavenly lake had the little Huzhang. As long as there was a capable person to manage it, it could even defend against the attacks from people from the heavenly abode. If Zhang Yan cultivated to the 3rd stage of Yuanying and used his Dharma body to travel, he would not have to worry about people destroying his body. Moreover, the disciples of big sects had seniors from the same sect to support each other, so there was no need to worry. Zhang Yan waved his hand and kept the heaven and earth leaf and the few treasures left behind by Shen Lintu. He did not have time to look at them and just threw them into his sleeve. At this moment, his gaze moved down and he looked at the floating blood on the waves. He thought to himself, I wonder how the dragon carp is. If it is really heavily injured, I cannot let go of such a rare opportunity. Thinking about this, he did not hesitate. He leaped up and used the water escape technique to dive into the deep sea. With this divine path technique, his body was faster than the fish in the sea. Without spinning, he traveled dozens of miles. Along the way, he saw countless corpses of fish spirits and prawns. The deeper he went, the more corpses he saw. As far as the eye could see, there were shattered limbs of the shell whale. Even the sea python demon shark that had followed the dragon carp over earlier had been slashed into countless pieces. Its broken body floated in the water, and the entire place was filled with the smell of blood. It had practically dyed the seawater below red, and one could see just how intense that battle was. After a few miles, he was already in the deep sea. He slowed down and carefully swam in this part of the sea. After approximately an hour, he discovered that there was a black jade belt that was a few miles long beneath him, and it was meandering and climbing above the seabed. It had a majestic appearance, and it was like the shape of a dragon. The spiritual energy was vast and unrestrained, and it was simply comparable to a paradise. However, the surroundings were abnormally quiet, and not a single aquatic creature approached. His expression changed slightly. After thinking for a while, he followed the stone belt and walked forward. After traveling for 100 miles, the black jade belt converged into a place where spiritual energy was deposited. Layers of rocks were piled up, forming a mound that looked like a dragon's head. He looked at it for a while, and his eyes suddenly focused. On the dragon's head, there was a black shadow that was hundreds of feet in size. It was surrounded by dozens of shark demons. The dragon carp demon was lying quietly among them. Its claws were tightly clenched on two pieces of jade that looked like dragon horns. Its back was moving up and down, as if it was resting. At this moment, it looked extremely miserable and was no longer as mighty as before. Not only was its tail fin broken, but thick blood with a fishy smell floated out from time to time. The whale scales on its body were even more broken. There were knife wounds everywhere, exposing a large area of its internal muscles. The knife wound on its neck was especially shocking. It almost chopped off its head, and the wound was so deep that bones could be seen. At this moment, there were two golden whiskers that were 30 feet long stretching out from its lips. They floated along with the water, and as they swayed, spots of spiritual light flew up from the black jade and entered the wounds. Zhang Yan was also secretly shocked. This dragon carp's cultivation was almost comparable to a cultivator in the third stage of yuaning. He had also seen the power of this demon, but he did not expect Xin Lintu to be able to injure it to such an extent. It could be seen how powerful its mana was. If it disregarded its life and fought with him, it would be difficult to get away without using the North Dark Sword. This dragon carp also noticed Zhang Yan's approach. Its originally dull eyes suddenly condensed with a hint of light. It stared at him and made a sound, trying to intimidate him. Zhang Yan's expression was calm. Don't look at how miserable this old demon looked. This kind of mutant should still have a certain amount of combat strength. After half a day, it should have recovered a little. Just now, when it stared at Zhang Yan could feel the waves around him faintly surging, as if they were brewing a raging wave. But since he dared to come here, he also had the confidence to subdue this demon. Not only did Xin Lintu seriously injure this demon, but he also killed more than half of its guards. At this moment, the ones surrounding it were no longer a threat. He pointed his finger and said, "Go!" Suddenly, the 72, 10,000 beast sleeping moon streamers flew out together. More than 200,000 demon soldiers walked down from the streamers and lined up in a formation. In an instant, they formed the 6 returns earth frame formation, surrounding the dragon carp and its subordinates. Zhang Yan leaped up and landed on the main altar, holding the main streamer with one hand. This was the first time he used this formation against an enemy after it was completed. It was a good opportunity to test the power of this formation. Chapter 492. The dragon carp old monster also noticed that Zhang Yan was trying to subdue him. He roared angrily and shook his huge body. In an instant, endless waves and whirlpools were formed. The seawater within dozens of miles was moved by him. The more people there were in this 6 turnings earth frame formation, the more powerful it was. With the help of the formation's spiritual opportunity, the 200,000 demon soldiers could move mountains. But even so, they could not stop the dragon carp from unleashing its power. Especially under the surging waves, the demon soldiers couldn't stand still and were shaken. The formation they were standing in was also messed up. Zhang Yan couldn't help but sigh. This old monster was indeed a natural variant. He still had the strength to fight back even though he was injured so badly. Seeing that a few more whirlwinds would be enough to break the formation, he did not sit by the side and watched. He took out the mountain river one-breath cloud diagram from his sleeve and threw it onto the altar. At the center of the map, with a whoosh, it unfurled. Immediately, the gathered spiritual energy was released. Like a river branching out, it flowed in all directions, and then extended to every corner of the formation. In the blink of an eye, the formation was suppressed. Countless illusions of mountains and cliffs appeared from the formation. Zhang Yan waved the main flag. Hundreds of illusions of mountains floated in the air and pressed down on the dragon crocodile. The dragon carp old monster knew how powerful it was. He spat out several balls of lightning from his mouth and hit the mountain rocks. However, these illusions were formed by the formation. As long as the spiritual energy didn't stop and the formation didn't dissipate, there was no way it could stop. In just a moment, the dragon carp old monster was powerless. With a cry, he was knocked down from the black jade rock by the endless mountain rocks. Zhang Yan didn't activate the lightning fire in the formation because he was afraid of harming the dragon carp old monster. He waved the main flag again. Instantly, countless mountain rocks flew into the air and fell down, pressing down on the dragon carp old monster. He took 2 steps forward to the edge of the altar and said loudly, "Fellow Taoist, why do you have to resist? That Shen Lin fought with you, and although he suffered heavy injuries, he is not dead yet. If he sends his disciples to capture you, how will fellow Taoist be able to resist the invisible Yin blade? You should follow me back to Donghua Qinsong School and guard my cave abode. If I achieve Tao in the future, I won't owe you anything." The dragon carp didn't listen to him. It had been free on Donghai for thousands of years and had countless aquatic creatures at its beck and call. If it followed Zhang Yan, it would inevitably be detained. Therefore, although it was pressed down by the formation, it refused to give in. It was still holding on and wanted to break free. Zhang Yan wasn't impatient. He smiled and said, "You're still barbaric and don't know what's good for you. Let's see how long you can last." Based on the current situation, the dragon carp would be exhausted in at most half a day. When it lost the ability to resist, he could keep it and bring it back to Qinsong School. Zhang Yan had plenty of ways to deal with it. While he was subduing the dragon carp old monster, a group of people arrived on the surface of the sea. Anyone in Donghai could recognize that they were disciples of Chongyue True Temple. The Taoist in the lead looked to be in his 30s. He was handsome and had an unusually long black jade hairpin on his head. There was a cloud of spiritual energy floating above his head. His sleeves and the corners of his robe were embroidered with a mysterious golden pattern. It was obvious that his identity was extraordinary. Other than him, the other 7 or 8 people were all golden core cultivators. After the Taoist looked down a few times, he stroked his beard and said, "Junior Marshal Brother Jiang, take a look. It should be around here." A scholar with a feminine appearance came up from behind him. He took a chi dynamic and put it in front of him to identify it. He turned around and cupped his hands, saying in admiration, "Senior Marshal Brother Su's vision is really accurate." Taoist Su's face had a hint of pride. Even if that old carp is still alive, he should only have half a life left. Senior Marshal Brother Shen can't fight now, and no one in the Shen clan can subdue this dragon carp. My Su clan can subdue it on his behalf. Junior Marshal Brother Jiang nodded in agreement. In Chongyue True Temple, the disciples of the Shen and Su clans were the most powerful. The rest of the disciples with different surnames were attached to their clans. However, the relationship between these 2 clans was not very harmonious. The fact that Shen Lintu's Dharmakaya was broken might be hidden from the disciples, but it could not be hidden from the elders of the Su clan. In the temple, other than Mi Zhenren, Shen Lintu's cultivation was originally the first in the sect. Over the years, the disciples of the Shen clan had grown a lot stronger due to his prestige, firmly suppressing the Su clan. But this time, Shen Lintu returned with a broken halberd and lost hundreds of cultivation. The Su clan felt that the opportunity to be proud had come. Taoist Su was in high spirits. He pointed down and said, "As long as we capture this dragon carp and make it our guardian spiritual beast, I can also go to the sword competition of Donghua continent." Oh no! Junior Marshal Brother Jiang couldn't help but be surprised. He asked, "Senior Marshal Brother, the sword competition of the 16 sects is the battle of Donghua continent. Why do you want to go?" Taoist Su smiled mysteriously and said, "Of course there's a reason for that. I've only learned about it from Zhenren Mi not long ago. I'll tell you about it after we catch the dragon carp." Hearing this, Junior Marshal Brother Jiang was a little flattered. He hesitated for a while, then cupped his hands and said, "Senior Marshal Brother, I am willing to go under the sea and find out where that dragon carp is hiding." Taoist Su laughed and said, "There is no need to go through so much trouble." He took out a bronze mirror from his sleeve and handed it to Junior Marshal Brother Jiang. He said, "Junior Marshal Brother, use this to carefully search under the sea. If you see anything strange, report to me immediately." Junior Marshal Brother Jiang took the mirror and said happily, "So it is the dust-seeking mirror. That will be easy. Senior Marshal Brother, please wait. I will be back soon." After saying this, He used the escape smoke under his feet and moved forward. After walking for a short while, he had to stop and take a breath to identify it. Just like this, he walked for hundreds of miles. Finally, he found a boundary and took the mirror and shook it in front of it. A beam of light shone out and went straight to the bottom of the sea. Everywhere it passed, everything was clear. After a while, his face suddenly tensed up. He quickly kept the mirror and rushed back. Taoist Su saw him coming back from afar and asked, "Junior Marshal Brother, how is it? Did you find the dragon carp?" Junior Marshal Brother Jiang came closer and said anxiously, "Senior Marshal Brother, something bad has happened. There is a rune formation under the sea. It seems like someone took action before us." Hearing this, Taoist Su's expression changed. He said, "Bring me there quickly." Junior Marshal Brother Jiang turned and led the way. Taoist Su waved his sleeves and followed. Not long after, the two of them arrived at the place. He shone the mirror light and said, "It is here." Taoist Su looked down and saw a murderous aura under the sea. The spiritual vigor was condensed but not chaotic. Who knew how many formation flags were swaying? He thought to himself, the number of sects in the Eastern Sea that can set up such a big formation can be counted on one hand. Originally, the Reef Manor had this ability, but it has long been destroyed. Clear Feather Sect also has many bird soldiers but not so many water demon soldiers. Could it be the Carp Tribe Demon Lord Chu's troops? He couldn't help but frown. If it was really the Carp Tribe that interfered, then things would be a little troublesome. He thought again and a ruthless expression appeared on his face. He thought to himself, why do I care so much? The Carp Tribe was chased out of the Donghua continent by Qinsong School. They are just stray dogs. They came to the Eastern Sea less than 100 years ago. My Chongyue True Temple has been here for thousands of years. In terms of foundation and disciples, why would we be afraid of them? Moreover, this dragon carp was injured by Elder Shin. How could it be the Carp Tribe's turn to take advantage of it? His eyes flickered. He stroked his beard and thought for a while. In the end, he said in a deep voice, "This formation is powerful. If we go in now, we might not be able to break it. You all should retreat first. Without my permission, don't turn back." Junior Marshal Brother Jiang showed concern and asked, "Senior Marshal Brother, what do you plan to do?" Taoist Su smiled strangely and said, "I will wait here. When this person comes up, I will probe him." Junior Brother Jiang heard the hidden killing intent in his words and guessed that he would definitely make a move against the person below. Thus, he didn't ask any more questions and gestured to the disciples behind him, leading them to retreat several tens of kilometers away to wait. Taoist Su stared down and silently circulated his mysterious technique. Afterwards, he opened his mouth and spat out a small blade that seemed to be condensed from dark light. He spun it around in his hand and blew on it. The blade suddenly disappeared without a trace. The Taoist technique of the Chongyue True Temple was based on the transformation of the yin and yang blades. However, due to the difference in cultivation and personality of each person, the techniques they cultivated were also different. Shen Lintu was proficient in attacking enemies with the Changyang blade. When facing enemies, he would always attack from the front. Although Taoist Su's cultivation was not as good as the former, he took a different path and spent his entire life refining the yin blade. After several hundred years, he managed to refine this invisible flying blade. This blade was refined in imitation of the yin slaughtering blade. When it flew, it was invisible and unpredictable. If it was used for a sneak attack, it would be impossible to defend against. What was even more impressive was that when he struck out, he could control it from several kilometers away. Many cultivators on the ocean had died mysteriously to this blade because of a moment of carelessness. Taoist Su was planning to launch a sneak attack again. He wanted to wait for Zhang Yan to emerge from the ocean before killing him and taking the dragon carp for himself. At the bottom of the ocean, the old dragon carp's presence was gradually weakening. It no longer had the strength to struggle. It lay there without moving as if it was dead. Seeing that the time was right, Zhang Yan smiled and extended his hand. With a flash of true water light, the old monster was sucked into it. With another hand seal, the 200,000 demon soldiers returned to the banner. They turned into 72 streaks of light and flew over. With a shake of his sleeve, they were drawn in. At this moment, the landscape of mountains and rivers also flew over. He held it in his hand and examined it closely. He found that the spiritual veins stored within were at least 10% more than before. He shook his head. These spiritual veins had to be used sparingly. Putting the map into his sleeve, he looked down at the dragon-shaped black jade belt. After a while, he suddenly leaped up and walked back and forth a few times along the belt. His water element true light fell on the belt repeatedly and collected it cleanly. He originally thought that this place was also a spiritual vein. However, the spiritual chi on the black jade belt was condensed and did not dissipate. He tried to breathe it in and out, but he could not absorb it into his body. However, the dragon carp could use this item to heal its wounds. It was obvious that there was something special about it. He could not tell where this item came from. Leaving it here would only benefit others. Thus, he spent some effort and collected it all. He planned to examine it carefully in the future. After this matter was settled, he made a hand seal and used the water escape technique to rise to the surface of the ocean. In just a few breaths, he broke through the water surface. However, at this moment, his eyes narrowed slightly. A cold chill suddenly approached him and went straight for his neck. Chapter 493. P.S. Originally, I wanted to make up for the missing chapter, but I caught a serious cold. I'll think of a way to make up for it on Wednesday. Taoist Su felt that someone who could control such a large formation under the sea was definitely not someone easy to deal with. Thus, he waited at the side for a long time and waited for the moment Zhang Yan broke through the surface of the sea. Then, he gathered all his strength and abruptly released the blade. This cold knife ray was incomparably fast, and the rarest thing was that it didn't make a single sound. He was determined to get it, but just as this knife approached Zhang Yan, a clear and melodious sword chime rang out above the sea. A sword ray rushed out to intercept the invisible knife. Relying on this invisible flying knife, Taoist Su had killed countless cultivators in the dark. Among them, there was no lack of magical treasures and spiritual objects that spontaneously protected their masters. He wasn't a novice and was long prepared. His index and middle fingers that were originally pressed together separated, and the invisible knife suddenly split into two. One knife went to meet the star's sword pellet, and the other knife didn't change its momentum, continuing to slash forward. Zhang Yan's treasured robe couldn't withstand the pressure and didn't wait for him to activate it. It automatically propped up a ray of light and protected him. However, this blade seemed to have used up all of Taoist Su's magic power, and its power was unimaginable. The light on the treasured robe couldn't be blocked, and in the blink of an eye, a layer of it was torn open and the blade pierced through. However, after being blocked by the protective spiritual light, the blade ray dimmed a bit and its momentum was much weaker than before. It was impossible to cut off Zhang Yan's head. Although Taoist Su felt that it was a pity, he was still quite confident. His blade wasn't as sharp as the Yang blade, but as long as it was a body of flesh and blood, even if it cut a bit of flesh, it would be able to turn qi into blood and attack the heart, stirring up the internal organs. As long as a cultivator hadn't reached the step of shedding their body, they would undoubtedly die if they were hit by this strike. However, when the blade struck Zhang Yan's neck, it was like it was striking metal and emitted a sonorous sound. The blade instantly shattered and turned into a ball of black essence that spiraled in the air. Taoist Su hid a few miles away and cast a technique to hide his body. He was originally staring at this place, but when he saw this scene, he was extremely shocked. The invisible blade was his biggest trump card. If even this blade failed, he couldn't imagine what kind of technique would be able to kill Ling Xian. He was a quick-witted person, and he immediately determined that since he was unable to do anything to this opponent, then it would probably be impossible to seize the dragon carp from him. There was no benefit in staying here any longer, and he instantly had the intention to retreat. It wasn't easy for him to cultivate to the nascent soul stage, so he treasured his own life very much. Even if he couldn't obtain this monster, he wouldn't risk his own life. Suppressing the trace of unwillingness in his heart, he sighed inwardly and made a hand seal. The jet-black spiritual essence suddenly flew back and once again reformed into a flying dagger. Soon after, he leaped up and flew away. Zhang Yan had the warning from the stellar sword ball, so he was already prepared for it. Even though he was ambushed, his expression was calm as usual. However, a strand of piercingly cold killing intent flashed in his eyes. He swept his gaze towards the direction the black gas was flying towards, and then he executed the minor universe escape art. His figures suddenly vanished from the spot, and in just 2 breaths of time, he had already caught up to the black gas. Just as Taoist Su leaped into the escape light, his vision suddenly blurred. He saw a handsome Taoist walking in the air and blocking his way. Taoist Su's expression turned cold. He knew that the Taoist Su was looking for him, but he didn't even look at him. He waved his hand and a sharp blade light flew over. At the same time, he made a technique and his whole body was attached to the invisible Yin blade. This invisible Yin blade that he had painstakingly cultivated could be used to escape even if it couldn't hurt the enemy. Its speed was not inferior to a flying sword. When he flew, he could also disappear. As long as he was a few hundred miles away, no one would be able to find him. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand and pointed. The star's sword pellet flew out and blocked the incoming blade gleam. However, Taoist Su's figure flashed and disappeared without a trace. It was as if he had the ability to escape through the void. Zhang Yan frowned and thought to himself, this person left decisively and has this kind of concealment divine art. It won't be easy to track him down. In a battle of magical powers between cultivators, the most headache-inducing thing was that the opponent had a flying Taoist technique that was difficult for ordinary people to achieve. This meant that the opponent could advance and retreat at will. For example, the sword escape technique was one of them. The second was the art of concealment and concealment. If Zhang Yan was a 3rd-level nascent soul cultivator, or had completely mastered the 5 elements escape technique, then he would be able to find a way to lock down this area of the world. No matter how capable this person was, he wouldn't be able to escape. However, he didn't have the ability to do so, so he had to find another way. When Zhang Yan met Taoist Su, he saw that his clothes were similar to Shen Lintu's. He guessed that this person should be a disciple of Chongyue True Temple. Chongyue True Temple was in the northwest direction. If this person was escaping, he would most likely go there. These thoughts flashed through his mind extremely quickly. In just a short moment, he had already figured out the crux of the problem. Without any hesitation, he took 2 steps forward and used the lesser teleportation escape technique. In an instant, he had moved tens of thousands of feet away. Then, he waved his sleeve and a monstrous water light was released. It surged forward and occupied several miles of the sea. His judgment was very accurate. After Taoist Su hit his figure, he didn't think much and flew towards the mountain gate. However, he was blocked by Zhang Yan. Although Taoist Su noticed that Zhang Yan was blocking in front of him, when he used his escape technique, he couldn't avoid it in a hurry. If the true weapon in his hand was the Yin slaughtering blade, then it would be very different. With just a thought, he would be able to dodge it. However, this invisible Yin blade was refined by him, so it did not have that kind of ability. Thus, it was immediately exposed. Since he couldn't avoid it, he could only force his way through. Priest Su let out a shout and poured his mana into the invisible flying knife. The knife trembled slightly and let out a buzzing sound. It spat out a wisp of black knife ray. With a chi sound, it slashed the water element true light in front of him as if it was tearing a piece of paper. Then, it turned around and left. Zhang Yan focused and searched. He saw that in the water light, there was a shadow moving quickly. However, under the changes of the light, although he could make out the silhouette, he couldn't make out the exact appearance. Wherever it passed, the water light that was blocking its way was destroyed. It was heading towards the southeast. If he allowed this person to kill his way out of the water element light, it would be extremely difficult to find him again. He calmly took out a few scarlet thunder beads and held them in his hand. When he found the opportunity, he shook his hand and shot it out. Taoist Su controlled his blade and slashed continuously. Suddenly, his body relaxed. He realized that he was out of the water element light. He hurriedly used his blade and wanted to escape into the distance. But at this moment, a few scarlet thunder beads flew over and exploded in the air in front of him. After a loud muffled sound of thunder, he felt that his eardrums were about to burst. The escape light that was under him was almost shattered. The escape light that was originally flying non-stop also stopped for a moment. At this moment, Zhang Yan just happened to get out. He waved his sleeve and the water light that Taoist Su had just flung away enveloped him again and entangled him. In the past, when Taoist Su encountered danger, he always relied on the invisible flying blade to escape. He had never had the experience of his tail being caught by an opponent. But now that he was blocked by Zhang Yan twice in a row, he was also very annoyed. But after the previous lesson, he also learned to be smart. When he flew, he didn't dare to run in one direction. Instead, he flew east and west, changing directions. But because of this, his speed was also a little slower. After a dozen breaths, he was still circling in the water element light and didn't get out. With the help of the blurry light, Zhang Yan could still vaguely see where he was escaping to. But even so, he still couldn't defeat the enemy. The blade gleam was so sharp that the water element light could only restrain it, but ultimately couldn't trap this person. He thought for a moment, and with a thought, the star's sword pill shot out like a lightning arrow and slashed towards the place where the invisible escape light was. Taoist Su was rather afraid of the scarlet thunder beads just now. But as long as he was prepared in advance, he thought that he could also avoid it. Now that he saw the flying sword coming over, he wasn't afraid. He snorted and controlled the flying blade to collide with the sword gleam. After a loud explosion, he still couldn't break the sword pill. He couldn't help but be startled. He didn't fight it head-on anymore and retreated. After flying for a few hundred feet, he suddenly tilted the blade and swept diagonally to avoid the pursuing sword gleam. This blade had long been refined as one with his own spirit. In terms of the art of moving in the air, the long-distance attack might not be able to beat the flying sword. But in terms of finesse, it surpassed the flying sword. If it wasn't for the water element light restraining him, he might have already escaped. Zhang Yan saw that the sword pill still couldn't restrain this person. He couldn't help but think of a countermeasure. After a few thoughts, he suddenly had a thought and thought to himself, I might as well take this out and try. It might be useful. He unfurled his sleeve, and with a shake of it, thousands of bloodline gold bugs were poured out. They surrounded him like dark clouds. He pointed forward and the gold worms let out a strange cry. They flapped their membranous wings and flew towards the direction of the invisible Yin blade. Taoist Su had been entangled by the flying sword for a long time. Seeing that he still couldn't break out, he felt a little unconfident. He knew that there was no Dao technique in the world that he couldn't handle. If he continued to be entangled, who knew what the other party could think of to deal with him? He still had a hidden technique. If he used it, he was confident that he could escape. It's just that this method consumes a lot of magic power and may even damage one's foundation. Thus, he hasn't made up his mind yet. But at this moment, he suddenly heard a buzzing sound next to his ear. Taking a look, he was shocked. He saw thousands of six-winged demon worms flying towards him. Just by looking at their ferocious appearance, he knew that they wouldn't be easy to deal with. The speed of the blood thread gold worms wasn't slow. Although they couldn't see where the invisible flying knife was, they had the sword pill to guide them. Thus, they found the position in an instant and surrounded Taoist Su. Taoist Su hurriedly controlled the flying knife and struck left and right. But when the knife light hit the blood thread gold worms, there was a clanking sound and sparks flew. Not only did the knife not break, it was also blocked. It was difficult for him to fly as fast as before. After a while, he felt that it was difficult to move. The sword pill couldn't trap him, but with these worms, it was a different story. No matter where he flew, they were like a net, trapping him in 3 layers. His biggest advantage was that he was invisible when he flew, making it hard for others to track him. Once he was surrounded by these worms, he would be completely exposed. Dealing with them would be much easier. At this point, Taoist Su didn't care about holding back. He snorted and the knife shook. It turned into hundreds of shadows that flew in all directions. It was unknown which was where his real body was, but in the blink of an eye, he passed through the worm net and escaped. Chapter 494. After Zhang Yan released the blood thread golden worms, he originally planned to use them together with the stellar sword orb and the water element true light to delay the invisible flying knives for a while. That way, he could calmly set up the 6 returns formation and trap this person in it. At that time, he would use the thunder and fire in the formation to plow the place. No matter where that person hid, he would end up the same. However, Taoist Su was not a mediocre person. After hundreds of years of cultivation, he had fought with many cultivators, so his sense of smell was extremely sharp. Early on, when Zhang Yan hadn't even made a move, he'd already noticed that something was off, so he decisively utilized a secret technique to disperse the invisible flying daggers, causing them to transform into over 100 flying daggers that shot towards different directions. It wasn't just that, his speed had suddenly doubled. However, because of the water element true light, it was impossible for these scattered knife lights to escape in such a short period of time, so Zhang Yan also had time to respond. He sent out a command in his mind, and the densely packed blood thread gold insects in the air received his command. Without any hesitation, they suddenly dispersed, like flies chasing after a piece of meat, chasing after the scattered blade lights. However, these knife lights were invisible and shadowless. Under the water light, only a vague ripple could be seen. Even if the blood thread golden worms were magical, they could not completely lock on to the target. The Suo Xing were ferocious beyond compare, and they attacked in groups. Usually, dozens of them would surround each other and pounce at the same time. As long as they hit a flying dagger, it would be torn apart in an instant. In the blink of an eye, dozens of flying daggers were destroyed. These knife lights were originally separated from the invisible flying knives. After being broken, they all turned into water vapor and disappeared. But even so, there were still a few saber lights that slipped through the net and got out of the encirclement. As long as they got rid of the restraints of the water element true light, they would be able to fly in the air without leaving a trace. Then, they would not be able to stop them anymore. Zhang Yan sneered and said, "Do you think you can escape?" He stamped his feet, and in an instant, clouds rose and thick clouds appeared in a radius of several miles under his feet. At the same time, he took out a seal and 365 drops of heavy water flew out from the top of his head and scattered in all directions. In just an instant, they were scattered in all directions and floated in the air. From a distance, a large mass of thick cumulus clouds suddenly appeared on the sea, and the sky and earth suddenly darkened, covering the entire water area. Zhang Yan leaped into the air and sat cross-legged in the middle of the sea of clouds. He pointed his finger downwards, and the 365 drops of heavy water vibrated at the same time. Lightning leaped between them, and the sound of thunder resounded through the void. Although he did not have the Qian technique, the area covered by this technique was especially wide. As long as that person was still here, no matter where he escaped to, he would not need to use his eyes and ears to know where he was going. When the lightning struck, he would see how that person would defend. After waiting for a few breaths, his mind naturally sensed that there were movements coming from several directions. He didn't take a closer look and only focused on manipulating the heavy water, sending out 100 lightning bolts and striking downwards with the momentum of splitting the sky and clouds. Priest Su exerted all his strength just now, and only then was he able to shake off the water element true light. Initially, he thought that he would definitely be able to escape, but just as he got rid of the restraints, he felt that he had sunk deep into the raging ocean of thunder, lightning, and rainstorm. He clenched his teeth and guarded his body tightly. Layers of thunderbolts fell, and he used the knife lights to shake them off. But at this moment, his mana was almost exhausted. If he could not get out of this sea of clouds in a short period of time, the ending would be extremely bad. He quickly calculated in his mind. Just now, the invisible knife could not kill Zhang Yan, and his heart was already shocked beyond words. He did not think that he had the confidence to win this person, and so at this moment, he could only abandon the knife and admit defeat. That way, he might have a chance of survival. This choice was really not easy. At this juncture, anyone would be conflicted in their heart, and he was no exception. After hesitating for a while, He saw that the thunderbolts were falling like rain, and the thunderclouds above him were getting stronger and stronger. He was afraid that he could not even hold on for half an incense's time, so he did not delay any longer. He looked up and said loudly, "Are you Priest Zhang from Qinsong School? Hold on, I have something to say." As he spoke, he put away the knife and walked out from the conveyance light. He spread out his sleeves and did not even activate the protective treasure light, indicating that he had no intention of playing tricks. Seeing his actions, Zhang Yan pondered for a while, then shook his big sleeves and stopped the heavy water lightning. He temporarily stopped his mana and said, "Do you know who I am?" Priest Su said, "In this eastern sea, other than the fusionren of Dongtian, there are only a few people who have mana like Priest Zhang. But I know all of them, except for Priest Zhang. Previously, I heard that Jinren Zhang from Qinsong School came to Eastern Sea to travel, and only he came to Reef Prefecture's Lu clan, so I guess that Priest Zhang must be here." At this point, he sighed again and said, "Just now, because I coveted the dragon carp under the sea, I attacked Priest Zhang and tried to take the demon away. Now that I think about it, I really shouldn't have." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and did not deny it. He said, "What do you want to say to me?" Priest Su bowed and said, "I am willing to join Jinren's sect." He suddenly said this, which Zhang Yan did not expect. Joining his sect was not to take him as a master, but to become a guest of his prefecture and serve him as master. This was common in Xianmen, but it was usually when the disciples of the scattered sects felt that they had no hope of cultivating in the sect, so they joined a disciple of a large sect, begging for a cultivation cave or pills and treasures, and they would listen to their orders. Just like Zhang Yan's disciples, White Sky Demon King Lu Mainyang and Junyue Demon King Jing Miao, they were like this. He took out the cave in Clear Nether Lake for them to cultivate, but if he had any orders, the two demon kings would definitely listen. Zhang Yan raised his brows and said, "Priest Zhang's cultivation is not much weaker than I. Why are you doing this?" Priest Su raised his eyes and said calmly, "I am afraid of death." When he said this, not only did he not feel embarrassed, but he also said it as if it was a matter of course. Zhang Yan was startled, then laughed. It was rare to see a cultivator who could not care less about face and say that he was afraid of death. He looked at this person with interest and said, "I still haven't asked for Priest Su's name?" Priest Su cupped his hands and said, "I dare not. My surname is Su, and my name is Yu. I am a disciple of Chongyue True Temple. As for my name, since I am willing to join your sect, then it is in the past, there is no need to mention it again." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Aren't you afraid of letting down your sect's ancestor by joining someone else?" Priest Su said forcefully, "My master is already dead, and I have no disciples under me. I only admire Priest Zhang's magic power, so I am willing to join you just now. I am not betraying my ancestors or leaving the sect." Zhang Yan nodded and stared at him, saying, "If I want you to kill the disciples of Chongyue True Temple, what will you do?" Taoist Su sighed. Though he was afraid of death, he didn't want to betray his master. Thus, he bitterly laughed and answered, "If that's the case, then it means you don't want to let me live. I have no choice but to kill myself." Zhang Yan suddenly burst into laughter and said, "Don't worry. You alone are more than enough to deal with the thousands of disciples in your sect. If you're sincere, I won't let you meet Chongyue's disciples." Priest Su was overjoyed. He bowed deeply and said, "Thank you for your care, Jinren." It was not without reason that Zhang Yan was willing to accept him. He thought about it and realized that the sword battle between the 16 sects was imminent. If he could accept a Yuanying Jinren as his subordinate, it would be very beneficial. It should be known that no matter if it was the Xianmen or the Devil sects, the cultivators who were able to sit in his position were mostly supported by a huge force. Thus, when rushing to the Dharma assembly, it was impossible for him to go alone. He would definitely bring along the disciples of his mansion to show off his status. For example, the disciples of those aristocratic families with deep foundations would even bring along the elders to guard against accidents. Although Zhang Yan was one of the top 10 disciples of the Yingtsong sect, he had not been in the sect for long. He had only entered the Tao for a little more than 100 years, so his foundation was not deep. If the number of disciples he brought to the Dharma assembly was lacking, although he did not care much, the elders of the Ingtsang sect would lose face. Now that this person was willing to come and seek refuge, it could not be better. As for which sect this person was from in the past and whether or not they were enemies, there was no need to think about it. As long as he made an oath, everything would be fine. Zhang Yan said seriously, "You have to think this through. I am from Qinsong. Now that the demonic calamity has begun in Donghua continent, if you come with me, you might end up going to the sword battle of the 16 sections. During the calamity, losing your life is a small matter, but if your spirit is destroyed, it will be impossible for you to reincarnate." Taoist Su chuckled. If he was unwilling now, his life would be in danger. How would he have time to think about the future? Therefore, he said without thinking, "If that's the case, it's my bad luck. I can't blame you, Taoist." But Zhang Yan threw a golden talisman over and said, "Make an oath." Taoist Su caught it and made an oath without hesitation. Then he cut his finger and dripped a drop of blood onto the golden talisman. Then he bowed to the sky and tore the golden talisman in half. He put one half into his mouth, chewed it, and swallowed it. Then he held the other half above his head. Zhang Yan waved his hand and kept the other half of the golden talisman. Then he channeled his energy and turned it into a faint purple aura. It floated into his forehead and disappeared. If Taoist Su broke his oath, he only needed to think of a way to take his life. Even if he didn't do anything, the talisman would activate in a short while, and he would still die. Seeing that his life was no longer in danger, Taoist Su let out a sigh of relief. From now on, he was a disciple of the clear nether heavenly lake. He bowed respectfully and said, "Mannerhead, there are still a few of my fellow disciples waiting nearby. Can I go and say a few words to them?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I am not an unreasonable person. I won't restrict you for no reason. You can go on your own. I will return to East Flower and call for you when the time comes." Taoist Su said gratefully, "Thank you, Mannerhead." He took out the knife and leaped onto it. With a flash of spiritual light, he disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Although Zhang Yan saw him flee, he was unable to discern where he was heading. He couldn't help but ponder in his heart. If he were to encounter such a troublesome person who was adept at fleeing, how would he deal with him? He couldn't always cause such a big commotion. It would be fine if he was dealing with one person, but if there were others helping him, he wouldn't be able to stop them. Chapter 495. P.S. Update yesterday, there's one more update at night. Clear Feather Sect, Xianling Island, Shuyuan Manor. Under a green pine tree, Zhang Yan sat cross-legged on a rock that was as smooth as a mirror. His gaze was focused, and he held a token of demon's sealing in his hand. His expression was deep as if he was thinking about something. The Nether Spring Sect's elder, Zhang Boyan, was imprisoned within this command talisman. After he obtained it from ancestor Tai Heng that day, because he didn't have the strength to suppress this old devil, he'd always kept it in his sleeve and paid no attention to it. After he achieved Yuaning, he ran around everywhere and did not have the time to deal with this item. The demon sealing token of an Etta temple did not have the ability to kill the cultivators of the demon doctrine. It was only used to temporarily imprison them so that it would be convenient for the disciples to bring them back to the sect. At that time, Patriarch Taiheng had only casually accepted this person and hadn't spent much effort on the seal. As such, the magic power on the seal would only last for a few decades at most before dissipating. In other words, even if Zhang Yan did not care, this old demon would be able to see the light of day again in no time. In a few more years, it would be the sword battle between the 16 sections. Therefore, he decided to clean up this matter first. According to his original plan, he would kill this old demon on the spot after he was released and give his Yuanian blood to the demon's sealing token as a tonic. However, after the incident with Taoist Su, he had other ideas. He already had Lu Mainyong who achieved Yuaniing in the clear nether heavenly lake. With the addition of Taoist Su, there would be 2 Yuaniing cultivators in his residence. They would be of great help during the spell gathering. However, no one would complain about having too much help. Therefore, he wanted to try and see if he could take this Zhang Boyan as his disciple. This old demon was good at fighting. If he could subdue him, he would have a higher chance of getting the item. If he was unwilling to submit, then it would not be too late to kill him. However, the Yellow Springs escape technique that the old devil was proficient in had left a deep impression on him that day. It was also a famous escape technique that could not only allow one to ascend to the heavens and descend to the earth, he could pass through mountains and rocks, and he could even transform into formless forms. He could gather and disperse them at will. Moreover, this old devil was very cunning. Fearing that he would escape, Zhang Yan took out a set of formation flags from his sleeve and placed them around him. This array flag was obtained from the sleeve of a certain elder of the Xian sect. Although it wasn't a very brilliant magic tool, it was not a very powerful magic tool. However, it was enough to trap the enemy. After the array was set up, Zhang Yan carefully examined it again. Seeing that there were no loopholes, he reached out and wiped the remaining FA off the token. Once the seal was removed, there was no movement from the token at first. However, a moment later, thick yellow smoke suddenly rose from it, as if dust was being thrown into the air. They spread out in all directions. When it touched the edge of the formation, it rolled back into the center. Not long after, it shrunk into a ball and spun around on the spot a few times. It slowly grew taller and formed a smoke figure that was as tall as a person. Then, it turned from incorporeal to a man with disheveled hair and slightly sunken eyes. It was an old man with a slightly gloomy gaze. The moment Zhang Boyan came out, he looked around warily. With just one look, he was able to deduce that he was trapped in a forbidden array somewhere. Because of the obstruction of the formation, all he could see was a gray ball of mist, and he was unable to see Zhang Yan. He silently circulated his Xian technique and frowned. After being trapped for dozens of years, he was unable to absorb spiritual energy in the formation. At this moment, he was extremely weak. Not to mention fighting with others, it was difficult for him to even use an escape technique. If he didn't rest for 3 to 4 years, it would be hard for him to recover his original FA Li. At this moment, Zhang Yan waved his hand and the fog in front of him dissipated. He didn't stand up and just sat there. "Greetings, Zhang." When Zhang Boyan came out of the formation, he guessed that someone was around. He wasn't surprised to hear someone greeting him. He turned around and looked over. When he saw a cloud hovering above Zhang Yan's head, he realized that it was a Yuanian cultivator. His eyes flickered a few times and he said in a deep voice, "May I know who you are?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I'm Zhang Yan, I'm from Qinsong School." "Zhang Yan?" Zhang Boyan was stunned. He felt that the name sounded familiar. After recalling for a while, he remembered that Su Gongyuan had once asked him to avenge his son. That seemed to be the name of that enemy. However, he had no enmity with Zhang Yan. Moreover, his FA Li hadn't recovered yet, so he wouldn't seek death and take the initiative to expose the matter. Thus, he bowed and probed, "So it's fellow Taoist Zhang. Daoren still remembers that my family was sealed by that patriarch Taiheng. May I know where this senior is now?" When he was trapped in the seal, although he had not lost his mind, he was muddle-headed and did not know what had happened outside. Zhang Yan said loudly, "I have already killed Patriarch Taiheng. You don't have to worry, fellow Taoist." Zhang Boyan could not help but be shocked. He looked over in surprise, and a hint of fear could not help but appear in his eyes. He had experienced the power of this old devil before. Regardless of whether it was his methods or mystical abilities, they were top-notch. He knew how difficult it was to deal with him. If Zhang Yan could kill him, it was obvious that he was not as simple as he looked on the surface. He might even have some powerful Dharma treasures. It was not that he did not suspect that Zhang Yan was lying to him. However, it was a good thing to be able to escape from this old devil. Therefore, he hoped that it was true. He calmed himself down and asked, "Is this where your sect is located?" Zhang Yan shook his head and smiled. "No, this is the East Sea's Mystic Spirit Island, Clear Feather Sect's territory." "Oh," Zhang Boyan said. Although he had not seen Tao Zhenren before, he had heard of this person becoming a celestial abode master and founding a sect. Because he was not in the Qinsong school, he was slightly relieved. After thinking for a while, he cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist, for helping me escape. If fellow Taoist has anything you want Daoren to do, please let me know." He was also a person with deep thoughts. Zhang Yan released him from the seal and treated him so politely. He did not believe that Zhang Yan had no ulterior motives. Zhang Yan's sharp gaze fell on Zhang Boyan's face. He did not beat around the bush and directly stated his purpose. He said, "In order to attend the sword competition of the 16 sects, I will be returning to the sect in a few days. However, I am still lacking a few people to help me. Seeing that fellow Taoist cultivation is profound and your mana is extraordinary, I wonder if fellow Taoist can help I?" When Zhang Boyan heard this, he was very unwilling. This time, the sword competition of the 16 sects seemed to be no different from the previous few times. However, as an elder of the Nether Spring sect, how could he not know that this time, it actually involved a battle of fate between two parties? It was extremely dangerous. If he was not careful, he could lose his life, not to mention helping a disciple of the celestial sect. However, at this moment, the enemy was strong and he was weak. It was not good for him to say no directly. If that happened, he would be the one at a disadvantage. Thus, he said, if it was him, then it would be fine. However, Daoren is from the Devil sect, and fellow Taoist is a disciple of the celestial sect. I am afraid that this is inappropriate. How about I give fellow Taoist a few magic treasures as a token of gratitude? However, Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and said in an unquestionable tone, "This is not a problem. I know that fellow Taoist is from the Nether Spring sect. If you are willing to pledge allegiance to me, I will not order you to become an enemy of the Nether Spring sect. However, if you meet a cultivator from the Devil sect, you cannot refuse." When Zhang Boyan saw that Zhang Yan's attitude seemed to be determined to kill him, he instantly became angry and laughed mischievously. "What if Daoren refuses?" Zhang Yan said indifferently, "That is also not a problem. I will kill you here to prevent future troubles." As soon as he finished speaking, a fine light rushed out from the top of his head. On top of it, there was a round sword ball that emitted a dense cold air. The sword's light was expanding and contracting as if it was eager to devour someone. When this sword came out, Zhang Boyan only felt the hair on his back stand up and a chill spread all over his body. Although Zhang Yan's tone was light, there was a piercingly cold killing intent in it. It was as if as long as he said, "No," Zhang Boyan would immediately kill him. His power had not recovered, so no matter what, he was not Zhang Yan's opponent. If he wanted to live, the only way was to yield. However, no matter how he thought about it, he still felt a little unwilling. He said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist, can you give me 2 days to think about it?" However, Zhang Yan pressed forward step by step. He urged his magic power, and the flying sword above his head shone brightly as if it could slash down at any time. At the same time, he shouted, "What difference does it make if it is 1 day earlier or 1 day later? I still have important matters to attend to. Fellow Taoist, quickly make up your mind." Even though Zhang Boyan was a famous devil lord, he was still at his wits' end in the face of such an unyielding attitude. However, if he wanted to keep his life, he had no choice but to agree. He cursed Zhang Yan in his heart, but he said in a low voice, "Since fellow Taoist thinks so highly of me," Zhang Yan didn't give him any chance to breathe. Without waiting for him to finish, he threw out a golden talisman and stared at him. "Words are no proof. Fellow Taoist, please make an oath, and I can entrust this important matter to you without worry." Now that things had come to this, Zhang Boyan also knew that he couldn't avoid it. With a calm face, he picked up the golden talisman and dripped his blood essence on it. Then, he tore off half of it and swallowed it. Zhang Yan knew that this old devil didn't do it willingly, so he didn't expect him to use his full strength. It was just a trump card hidden in the dark. However, at the crucial moment, it was enough for him to use some strength. He summoned the remaining half of the golden talisman and took a look at it. Then, he put it away and said with a smile, "I still need to trouble fellow Taoist to do a small thing." He made a hand sign and activated the Taishin True technique. The water element true light was released, and a long watercolored rainbow floated in front of him. With a wave, the dragon carp that was wandering in the water was dragged out and thrown on the ground. He pointed at it and said, "I heard that among the 6 devil sects, there are quite a few methods to deal with those who are unruly. Zhang is from the devil sects, so you must know quite a bit. This evil creature has been captured by I for quite some time, but it still isn't willing to surrender to me. Fellow Taoist, please think of a way to grind its temper." Looking at the dying dragon carp, whose eyes were filled with violence, Zhang Boyan was quite shocked. The dragon carp was a mutated species of the East Sea. It could suppress the sea and control the marine animals. He could tell that this monster had to live for at least a few thousand years to grow to such a huge size. Its strength was comparable to that of a Yuanying third-tier cultivator. Thinking about this, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. He said, "So I still underestimated this person. In that case, this Taoist Zhang really did kill Grand Elder Taiheng." He had a stomach full of resentment and had nowhere to vent it, so he could use this dragon carp as an example. Therefore, he didn't reject it. His eyes flashed with ferocity, and he laughed sinisterly. He said, "Fellow Taoist, just you wait. In less than 20 days, I will make it obedient." Zhang Yan calculated the time and nodded with a smile. He said, "Then let's use a month as the deadline. After a month, I will need to return to Donghua. I hope that fellow Taoist won't disappoint me at that time." Chapter 496. Zhang Yan waited for more than 10 days. When he went to see the dragon carp again, he didn't know what method Zhang Boyan used, but the old demon's ferocious nature was gone. It became docile and obedient. He couldn't help but be pleasantly surprised. He said, "Zhenren is so capable to be able to tame such a ferocious demon. I asked you to come forward this time, and it's the right medicine." Actually, it wasn't difficult for him to bring the dragon carp back to the heavenly lake of Zhaoyu, but he had to trap it in the water element true light, which required mana to suppress it. It was fine now that the demon was weak, but once its mana recovered a little, it would be a burden. In these few days, he went to the Hall of Patriarchs and asked Tao Zhenren for a beast-subduing collar. He was prepared to trap it in case Zhang Boyan couldn't subdue the demon, and then slowly clean it up when he got back. He didn't expect the old demon to have some tricks up his sleeve. Zhang Boyan wasn't modest and said proudly, "This is nothing." When Daoren was in the Netherworld Spring sect, he was also the head of the punishment court. Who knows how many disciples who broke the sect's rules were in his hands. They knew that once they told the truth, they would die, so they didn't want to admit it. But in the end, no one was able to escape from Daoren. Zhang Yan was surprised. He said, "I heard that the devil sect has a soul-searching method. Lies can always be seen through. What's the difference if you admit it or not? Wouldn't you have suffered for nothing?" Zhang Boyan chuckled and said, "You don't know, as long as the disciples of the devil sect don't betray their masters and ancestors, no matter what rules you broke, if you refuse to admit it, as long as you go through the punishment in the punishment court, not only will it be considered that you didn't do it, but you will also receive great benefits. It's a pity that since the establishment of the Netherworld Spring sect, only 3 people have been able to taste all 232 kinds of torture. The rest can only ask for a quick death." Zhang Yan couldn't help but smile. There was actually another reason why he accepted Zhang Boyan, and that was to find out a lot of secrets about the devil sect from him, so that he wouldn't have to go around asking around. Back then, although he had sent Su Yang to secretly join the devil sect, until now he had no choice but to do so. Only a few decades had passed. This brat is at most an inner disciple, and his knowledge of the movements of the sect is limited. How can he compare to Zhang Boyan, who is an elder of the demon cult? This spy might be useful in the future, but it is definitely not now. After chatting with Zhang Boyan for a while, Zhang Yan walked slowly to the dragon carp and looked at it calmly. The old demon trembled and knew that the time had come. He forced out a strand of Yuan Zhen's blood essence from his heart and swore a blood oath. Zhang Yan felt his body tremble slightly, and something seemed to have appeared in his mind. He silently sensed it, and all the thoughts of this dragon carp appeared in his mind. He knew that from this moment onwards he was already the master of this great demon, and he couldn't help but sigh with emotion. In Qinsong school, only Qi Yuntian had a dragon carp. Now that he had one of them, he didn't know which one was more profound. Zhang Boyan looked on from the side. He heaved a sigh of relief and said, "With this demon as the protector spiritual beast, as long as Priest Zhang is careful during the meeting, it shouldn't be hard for him to keep his life." After making the oath, although Zhang Yan couldn't order him to die, but fighting with the enemy was the right way to go. He couldn't go against it. He was really afraid that Zhang Yan would meet some strong person and send him out to take the blame. Now he was much more at ease. Half a month passed like that. Zhang Yan felt that he could return to Donghua, so he went to the Xianling Island Ancestral Hall and bid farewell to Tao Jinren. After talking in secret for an hour in the hall, he rode a cloud down the mountain. When he reached the beach, he saw the dragon carp lying quietly on the beach. Its golden scales shone brightly under the sun, and the two horns on its head were like blood-red coral, crystal clear. After recuperating for the past few days and swallowing quite a few medicinal pills and tonics, his injuries had already recovered. Even his severed tail fin had grown back. Just as Zhang Yan was about to step forward, he saw a streak of flying light circling around in the distance. It kept circling around, but it was hard to make out its shape. He shouted, "Is it fellow Taoist Su?" The disciple on duty knew that Zhang Yan was an honored guest of the ancestral master. Seeing that he knew who it was, he immediately opened the barrier and let the streak of light in. The streak of light found the door and darted inside. After circling in the air, the light faded, and Taoist Su appeared. He floated down from the cloud and greeted Zhang Yan. He looked at the dragon carp beside him and said in surprise, "Zhenren Zhang has subdued this old demon? Heh, I thought he was a tough guy, but he's just a coward." When the dragon carp heard this comment, it was annoyed and scolded. "At least he's better than a sneaky person like you who always stabs people in the back." This was the first time the old demon spoke. However, the voice that came out was extremely soft, like a child speaking. There was no aura to it. Taoist Su was stunned at first, then he laughed and said, "Interesting, interesting." The dragon carp seemed to know that its voice was flawed, so it didn't speak often. Seeing that Taoist Su was laughing at it, it couldn't do anything. It could only stare at him hatefully, as if it could kill Zhang Yan once he gave the order. After Taoist Su finished laughing, he noticed Zhang Boyan who was standing beside Zhang Yan. He cupped his hands at him. Zhang Boyan saw that the streak of light was strange and didn't dare to look down on him. However, when he returned the greeting, he still had the arrogance of a demonic sect in the Donghua continent. Zhang Yan said, "I was going to look for you, but since you're here, the three of us will return to Donghua together." Taoist Su's expression turned serious and said, "I've long heard that Qinsong School is a large Xianmen sect with tens of thousands of years of inheritance. I was just about to go and take a look." At this moment, the dragon carp supported itself with its claws and supported its huge body. It said fawningly, "Master, this little monster is good at water. Why don't you carry me? Walking on the sea isn't much slower than using the astral winds to escape." Zhang Yan said curiously, "But when I saw you chasing me that day, you weren't that fast." The dragon carp explained, "That's because this little demon needs to command the navy and control the chi of heaven and earth. If I don't have these, no one would dare to say that their ability to control waves in the sea is second." Taoist Su sneered and said, "If you don't brag, I will know that Zhenren Libuka's ability is far above yours." The dragon carp didn't dare to say that it was comparable to the Zhenren Dongtian. It couldn't help but be speechless. Then, it thought, why is this Taoist mocking me again? However, its brain wasn't very bright. It was so angry that it wanted to retort, but in the end, it couldn't force out a single word of rebuttal. A faint smile appeared on Zhang Yan's face. A cloud of smoke appeared beneath his feet, and his body floated up into the air. He landed on the back of the dragon carp and said, "Stop talking. Since you're boasting, let me see what you've got." The dragon carp gathered its spirit and let out a long dragon roar. The waves on the sea were stirred up, and countless crystal water droplets splashed. The demon paused its claws, and a gust of water vapor flew over, turning into a dark cloud under its abdomen. It swung its tail fin and created a trench on the sea. The fog and clouds rolled, and it flew towards the west. The demon seemed to be competing. Its mana climbed up layer by layer, and the waves under its body kept stirring. The water splashed to both sides, and in the blink of an eye, it disappeared into the horizon. Taoist Su had a mocking expression on his face. He took out the invisible Yin blade and leaped onto it. A faintly discernible escape ray quickly chased after the demon. It seemed like he still had a lot of strength left. Zhang Boyan didn't show any weakness as well, and he cackled strangely before suddenly transforming into a wisp of smoke that flowed forward mightily like a muddy river. The two of them were experts in flying, and they caught up in an instant. Zhang Yan lowered his head and looked down. He saw that the dragon whale was covered in water and the waves were rolling. The escape technique that it was using was somewhat similar to the water escape technique. It could use the momentum of the water to move. However, this was its natural supernatural power. It looked powerful, but it did not require much mana. At this moment, he suddenly thought of something. He patted the dragon horn on the head of the dragon carp and asked, "Do you have a name?" The dragon carp said, "My name is Siren. If you don't like it, you can change it." Zhang Yan smiled. "There's no need for that. I don't have such strict rules. You can still use your original name." Siren was beaten up miserably by Zhang Boyan a few days ago. If Zhang Yan didn't ask, it wouldn't dare to take the initiative to talk. Now that it finally got a chance to talk, it couldn't help but ask, "May I know where is your cave abode in Donghua?" Zhang Yan looked around and saw through its thoughts. To ease its mind, he said, "My cave abode is called the Heavenly Lake of Bright Serenity. It's also an underwater abode. It has a large circumference, and there used to be a heavenly abode of the water clan living there. You don't have to worry." Although the dragon carp recognized Zhang Yan as its master and had to follow him back to the abode, it was still a mutant of the sea. It couldn't live without water for a day, and it was most afraid of being confined in the wilderness. It couldn't stretch its body in the small rivers and rivers. Now that it heard that the Heavenly Lake of Bright Serenity was a blessed place for the water clan, it couldn't help but feel relieved. The three of them and the monster rode the waves on the sea, looking westward. In just 5 days they had already covered half of their journey. However, this journey caused a great commotion. As Yuanian cultivators, it was inevitable that the gang chi around them would spread out when they flew, constantly setting off monstrous waves. They didn't feel much about it, but they didn't know that it had already alarmed the various forces on the sea. Especially after entering the inner sea, it caused a lot of chaos. A nascent soul cultivator could be regarded as a grand supreme elder in those sects, and they rarely came out. Even if they traveled, they would be above the extreme sky, traveling by riding the strong winds. Ordinary cultivators rarely saw them. At this moment, they actually saw 3 of them, not to mention that the dragon-headed giant fish was also ferocious and terrifying. Wherever it passed, the cultivators all retreated in fear, afraid that if they were too slow, they would be killed by the gang chi that came out. On this day, near the edge of the East Flower Continent, there was a large boat moored. Many handsome male and female cultivators dressed in white stood on the cloud raft, waiting on both sides. A young woman with her hair combed into a ponytail, wearing a light yellow palace dress with ribbons around her body, stood at the bow of the boat. Her eyesight was extraordinary, and from hundreds of miles away, she saw the large waves and clouds coming. Knowing that the main character had arrived, she took a step forward. She activated her mystic technique, and a gang chi rose from the top of her head. She said in a clear voice, "My name is Mu Bingxin, an elder of the Priyuan sect." Chapter 497. After Mu Bingxin's voice traveled into the distance, she saw a line of white waves moving from the east to the west in the sky. The roar of the tides was like the charge of an army, crashing into the water and crashing into the waves. The disciples of Priyuan sect were originally watching from afar and only exclaimed a few times. However, when they got closer and saw the scene of the sea and the sky moving together, their faces all paled and their bodies trembled. Mu Bingxin opened her eyes wide and looked over. She saw 3 Taoists appear in front of her. The young Taoist was handsome and tall. He wore a black Taoist robe and was standing on the back of a strange dragon-headed fish with his hands behind his back. The person on the left had a pale complexion and was unremarkable. The one on the right seemed to be an old man. However, his entire body was wrapped in a wisp of yellow smoke, making it impossible to see his face. There was a cloud hovering above the 3 of them. It was obvious that what the letter said was true. All of them were Yuanying cultivators. The strange dragon-headed fish below had golden scales all over its body. Its spiritual qi was surging like the tide, as if it was one with the heavens and earth. It actually gave her a great deal of pressure. Penyuan sect was only a second-rate sect in Donghua continent. When it was at its peak, there were only 2 Yuanying cultivators in the entire sect. However, at this moment, 3 Yuanying Zenrins stood together, which shocked her greatly. She didn't dare to put on any airs. She stepped forward and bowed, saying, "May I know how to address you, Zenrins?" Zhang Yan glanced at her, then cupped his fist to return the greeting while sitting on the dragon carp's back. He said, "Reverend Mu is too polite. I'm Zhang Yan of Wucang, and the 2 fellow Taoists behind me are the guest elders of my residence." When Mu Bingxin heard the 2 words Zhang Yan, her eyes couldn't help but show surprise. She said seriously, "So it is Zhenren Zhang. I have long heard of your great name." Penyuan sect was adjacent to the East Sea, so she had heard a lot about the affairs of the sea. A few days ago, it was said that the destruction of the Lu family of the Wall Reef Prefecture was done by Zhang Yan. She didn't expect to see it today. Penyuan sect had dealings with many unorthodox sects and aristocratic families in the Eastern Sea. When she heard that several Yuanying cultivators were coming over from the sea, because she didn't know their purpose, she was asked by many of her fellow Taoists to come and ask them why they were here. At this moment, he had another idea in his mind and said, "The few Zenrins are passing by our mountain gate. Since we are all from the Xianmen sect, if we turn a blind eye, I'm afraid our fellow Taoists will scold our Penyuan sect for not understanding etiquette. I hope that the few of you will allow me to host a banquet and offer a toast to express my sincerity." She spoke politely. Zhang Yan pondered for a while. He had not returned to Donghua for a long time. He didn't know what the current situation was, so there was no harm in agreeing. He could also find out some information, so he smiled and said, "Then I'll be shameless and disturb you." Mu Bingxin revealed a trace of joy. She stepped sideways and said, "Fellow Taoists, please move." Her big boat was luxuriously decorated. There was a 5-story pavilion on the boat, and it was renovated magnificently. The main door opened. Zhang Yan nodded slightly at her and got down from the back of the dragon whale. Just as he was about to walk to the main hall on the boat, he heard a timid voice from among the disciples of Penyuan sect. "Zhenren Zhang." Zhang Yan tilted his head and saw a beautiful woman with a graceful figure standing among the crowd. That face was also a little familiar. After thinking for a while, he recognized her and said with a smile, "So it's fellow Taoist Dan Huijin. It's been more than 100 years since we last met, right? I didn't expect to meet you here." Dan Huijin had been saved by Zhang Yan back then. Just now, she had the courage to come up and greet him. However, after all, it had been 100 years. However, Zhang Yan was already Yuanying Zhenren now, so he wasn't sure if the other party still recognized him. When he heard this, he was relieved and smiled like a flower. Mu Bingxin said in surprise, "Zhenren Zhang and martial nephew Dan are old acquaintances?" Zhang Yan said with a smile, "In the past, when I went to the sea to look for medicine, I crossed the sea with Lady Shan. So I recognized her." Mu Bingxin's expression changed slightly. She didn't ask any more and came to the front of the hall. With a wave of her hand, 2 maids lifted the curtain in front of the hall and sent the 3 of them into the hall. The moment Zhang Yan stepped in, he only felt a dazzling light in front of him. It was even brighter than the outside. He looked around and saw that the 4 walls were inlaid with countless bright pearls. There were also more than 100 bronze mirrors with kuei patterns placed on the roof. The mirrors faced inward and shone straight down. They landed on the polished bricks under his feet, causing rays of light to form, which was why it was like this. He and Priest Su did not feel anything, but Zhang Boyan let out a humph. The yellow smoke on his body surged violently, pushing away all the splendor. He said in a strange voice, "Mu Jinren, you have a lot of tricks in this hole." These bronze mirrors were a set of magic weapons that had the ability to destroy evil. If it wasn't for his profound cultivation, he would have suffered a loss. Mu Bingxin could see that Zhang Boyan seemed to have learned the methods of the Devil's Doctrine, but it was common for Xuanmen's disciples to subdue a few people from the evil path for their own use. Therefore, she didn't suspect anything. She just laughed at herself and said, "I've made a fool of myself." Recently, the disciples of the Devil's Doctrine have become more and more rampant. Because I didn't set up any restrictive formations on this boat, I made this arrangement to prevent them from sneaking in. Zhang Yan frowned and said, "Now there are also forces of the Devil's Doctrine at the edge of the East Sea?" Mu Bingxin let out a sigh and told her the reason for her visit. It turned out that in the past few decades, the Donghua continent had been plagued by natural disasters and plagues. Demons were everywhere. The Wei and Liang kingdoms were at war. In addition to the invasion of foreign tribes, the dynasty that had been hundreds of years was already in a precarious situation. It wouldn't be long before it fell apart. In troubled times, human life was like grass. There were many disciples of the Devil's Doctrine who came out to capture people to refine spells and even establish their own sections. The East Sea was originally a vassal state of the Wei kingdom. Under the rule of the Hanhai kingdom, it was also unavoidable. However, it was different from the large Shenmen sections. Most of the cultivators here were high-ranking officials of the Hanhai kingdom. They had deep connections with each other, so they naturally wouldn't sit idly by and watch. Thus, they clashed with the disciples of the Devil's Doctrine. Especially in the past few years, the two sides had gradually become angry. Even the Pingyuan sect had suffered serious losses of disciples and was gradually on the verge of collapse. Zhang Yan didn't want the Donghua continent to be in such chaos after he left for more than 30 years. He said, "I heard that your sect has an extraordinary relationship with Taihao School. Why didn't you ask Taihao School for help?" Mu Bingxin snorted and said, "There are less than 5 years left for the sword competition between the 16 sections. Why would Taihao School care about this place?" Zhang Yan's gaze turned to her face. Seeing that her expression was full of resentment, he knew that there was more to it. However, he had no intention of knowing, so he didn't pursue the matter. Mu Bingxin invited Zhang Yan and the other two to sit down. After a few words, she found out that Zhang Yan had returned from overseas and was about to return to the sect. Because she had other thoughts in her mind, she tried to persuade him to stay. Zhang Yan had nothing to do, and he heard from her words that she seemed to have the intention of seeking refuge with Qinsong School. After thinking about it, he agreed to go to Pingyuan's sect for a few days. After the banquet ended, Mu Bingxin returned to the cabin, sat on the jade couch, and began to ponder. Now that the Devil's Calamity was gradually rising, Pingyuan sect only had one Yuaning Zhenren. In the conflict with the many disciples of the Devil's Doctrine, it was already difficult for her to stand alone. Originally, she wanted to ask Taihao School for help, but Pingyuan sect had a magic treasure called the Heavenly Palace. It had always been something that Taihao School wanted to obtain. In the past, it was not easy to make a move on it openly, but this time, she proposed to give it to them as a gift before they were willing to help. This was a move to take advantage of the situation. Although the sect leader of Pingyuan sect was a woman, she had a strong temper and refused to comply. As a result, the situation became more and more difficult. On the other hand, many sects in the north, such as Blue Feather, Linqing, and Beichen sects, had received Huaxian's strong support and had the backing of a colossus like Qinsong School. Their strength did not decrease but increased instead. She thought that if she could get the help of Qinsong School, she might be able to tide over this crisis. Originally, Pingyuan sect and Qinsong School did not have any relationship, so even if she went over, they might not even care about her. However, Zhang Yan's arrival this time was an opportunity. Seeing that Dan Huizhen and Zhang Yan were old friends, she thought of an idea. If she could get close to Zhang Yan's disciples or juniors, then things would be much more promising. Thinking up to here, she ordered the maidservant beside her, "Go find Tong Ao." The maidservant bowed and left to carry out the order. Not long after, a clever-looking child with delicate features walked in. He looked young, but his expression revealed a cynical attitude. Although his cultivation was not high and was only at the mystic light realm, he did not have any stage fright when he saw Taoist Mu. He cupped his hands and said, "This lowly one greets Taoist." Mu Bingxin said in a deep voice, "Tong Ao, I heard that your ears and eyes have always been well informed, and you have heard all the secrets of various sections. You have the good name of the six-eared golden child. I have come to ask you something, and if you tell me the truth, there will naturally be benefits for you." Tong Ao chuckled and said, "Taoist, feel free to ask. Even if it will cost my life, as long as the benefits are enough, I will tell you everything I know." Mu Bingxin raised her slender hand and pointed outside. She said, "Do you know how many disciples Zhang Yan has under him?" Tong Ao straightened his body and smiled. "Taoist, you have asked the right person. This lowly one just happens to know about this. This Taoist Zhang has a total of 6 disciples." Mu Bingxi nodded and said, "How are their cultivation levels? Are there any outstanding geniuses?" Tong Ao thought for a moment and said, "If we are talking about cultivation, then Taoist Zhang's eldest disciple, Lu Yenyi, is the highest. It is rumored that not only is her talent extremely high, but she is also proficient in the art of slaying enemies with flying swords like her master. She is also one of the 3 disciples of Qinsong school who have reached the 2nd grade in the past 100 years. Mu Bingxin couldn't help but be surprised. She originally thought that although Zhang Yan's cultivation was extremely high, it had only been a short time since he entered the Tao, so the cultivation of his disciples wouldn't be that high. She didn't think that his first disciple would also be so amazing. Her evaluation of Zhang Yan in her heart couldn't help but rise to another level. She took a deep breath and said seriously, "Continue." Tong Ao continued, "Taoist Zhang's 2nd disciple is called Tian Kuan. However, he has an indifferent personality and rarely shows himself. He also doesn't have any reputation. As for his specific cultivation level, this lowly one doesn't know." Mu Bingxin's expression changed and she hurriedly asked, "I wonder if Taoist Zhang's 2nd disciple has ever been married?" Tong Ao was a smart person and could guess Mu Bingxin's intentions from her tone. His eyes turned and he said playfully that Tian Kuan and Taoist Zhang's 4th disciple, Wang Kading, have already become Tao companions. There is no chance for others. Mu Bingxin unconsciously frowned. She only asked a few more questions before her eyes lit up and she said with joy, "You are saying that Taoist Zhang's 5th disciple, Jiang Zheng, is also at the mystic light realm?" Tong Ao smiled and said, "Yes, I heard that he was originally an in-name disciple of Taoist Yang. Later, seeing that he was diligent in his cultivation, he was accepted into the sect." Mu Bingxin said in her heart, "This is a suitable person." As she was thinking, a servant girl rushed into the room. Wan Fu said, "Taoist, Taihao School's Taoist, he has arrived on the boat and is heading here." Chapter 498. P.S. Today is the first day. Mu Bingxin's expression changed slightly. Just as she was about to order the maidservants to welcome the guest, the sound of footsteps came from outside. Then, the jade curtain was lifted, and a blue-robed Taoist with a scholarly face and 3 wisps of green beard had already stepped in. Behind him was a short and extremely shrewd young cultivator. Mu Bingxin was stunned, and then she was secretly annoyed. Putting aside her status as an elder in the Penyuan sect, she was still a female immortal, but the other party didn't even greet her and just swaggered in like that. It could be said to be extremely rude. But when she thought that the person who came in was Taoist He of Purple Bamboo Mountain, one of the 4 mansions and 3 mountains, and that his status in the sect wasn't low, she didn't dare to lose her temper. She forced a smile on her face and said, "Why did Senior Marshal Brother He come?" Why didn't you send someone to inform me so that junior martial sister could welcome you in advance? Daoist. He looked at Mu Bingxin's face as soon as he came in, and the subtle changes in her expression fell into his eyes. He revealed a deep smile and said, "How could I dare to trouble junior martial sister?" Mu Bingxin waved her sleeves at Tong Ao, indicating for him to leave. Tong Ao sensed that the atmosphere was a bit off. Without hesitation, he bowed and hurriedly walked out with his head lowered. But at this moment, the young cultivator standing behind Daoist, he took a step forward and blocked in front of him, saying, "Boy, I seem to have seen you somewhere before?" Tong Ao was very puzzled. He had never interacted with this person before, so how did he know him? But his mind was sharp. With a glance, he saw that the young cultivator's expression was unfriendly, and his heart skipped a beat. He immediately thought of the recent discord between Taihao School and Prinyuan sect, and thought to himself, "Not good, how did this young master get involved in a fight between immortals?" Sure enough, the young cultivator said unhurriedly, "I see that you're full of evil aura. Could it be that you're cultivating the demonic path?" Tong Ao was familiar with the secrets of the 100 sects, so he quickly guessed his identity and immediately put on a look of surprise. He said, "Are you Daoist Lu?" The young cultivator was startled and asked suspiciously, "You recognize me?" "I heard that Daoist Lu is an outstanding talent among the third-generation disciples of Taihao School." The young cultivator suddenly shouted and interrupted him, "Don't spout nonsense." He raised his hand, and a green light floated in the air. Then, a vine rope with knotted roots fell down from the sky. Tong Ao had originally wanted to flatter Lu Xing and fool him, but he did not expect that Lu Xing was not a simple character. He didn't try to tangle with him at all and attacked as soon as he said he would. However, no matter how good Mu Bingxin's self-restraint was, she couldn't endure taking someone in this cabin. She waved her sleeves. A ball of gang chi shot out like a pillar of smoke and stopped the vine. At the same time, he shouted, "Tong Ao, this has nothing to do with you. Get out." Tong Ao was scared out of his wits. He lowered his head and dashed away. Mu Bingxin was extremely resentful. Tong Ao was indeed from a side sect, and he did have some relationship with the devil sect. But he had never done evil in his life, and even if he was a disciple of the devil sect, it wasn't this junior's turn to teach him a lesson here. She originally wanted to reprimand him, but when the words came to her mouth, she forcefully endured it and only said coldly, "This is senior brother, he's disciple, right? How awe-inspiring." "Spiritual master," he chuckled. He said, "This is a good-for-nothing disciple of mine. His surname is Lu, and his name is Sheng. He hasn't cultivated for more than 60 years, so his Tao heart isn't firm. It's inevitable that he's a little impulsive." Mu Bingxin only snorted. "Spiritual master," he gave the young cultivator a look, and the latter immediately withdrew the vine rope. He stood there with his arms by his side, as if nothing had happened. Mu Bingxin said coldly, "Spiritual master, he has personally come to visit today. You must have something important to tell me." Spiritual master, he ignored the impoliteness in her words and only smiled. He took out a letter from his sleeve and flicked it to the table. He placed it on the table. "This was personally written by my senior apprentice brother Hong. Junior apprentice sister, please take a look. A letter from Elder Hong." Mu Bingxin couldn't help but frown. This Elder Hong was a very important person in Taihao School, and his Tao companion was originally a disciple sent by Prinyuan, but she had passed away many years ago. She reached out to take the letter, but before she could, "Spiritual master," he said, "the matter in the letter isn't something that can be decided by junior sister alone. My master and disciple will be leaving it for the next 2 days on Imperial Island's Rising Dragon Temple. When your sect has thought it through, you can come and find me." He cupped his hands and bowed, and actually turned to leave the cabin. Before Lu Sheng left, he glanced at Mu Bingxin and also started to follow. When the two of them reached the outer room, they rose into the air. "Spiritual master," he said, "Disciple, did you see anything?" Lu Sheng thought for a moment and said, "Master, this elder Mu is indeed afraid of our Taihao School's prestige. He deliberately humiliated her a few times, but didn't dare to do anything. This means that the rumors are wrong. She hasn't joined another sect yet, or she has this thought and hasn't taken any action yet. Correct. Spiritual Master He's eyes were full of praise. He said, "Your aptitude may not be as good as your deceased senior brother Hua, but you are much smarter. It's not in vain that I value you." Taihao School originally wanted to sit back and watch Peng Yuan fight with the disciples of the Devil's Doctrine. When they finally couldn't withstand it, they could come forward to clean up the mess. That way, they could smoothly take over the startling Heavenly Palace. But later on, there was news that Peng Yuan had joined another sect. Spiritual Master He's action just now was to test the waters. However, Mu Bingxin's reaction in that instant was mostly fear, which meant that this was most likely a rumor. Otherwise, they wouldn't have tolerated it. Spiritual Master He stroked his long beard and said thoughtfully, "The previous rumor should have been released by Peng Yuan to force our Taihao School to come forward and help." Lu Xing said in a low voice, "Mu Bingxin is still an elder of a sect. Just now humiliating her like this, isn't Master afraid of angering her and causing the matter to fall apart?" Spiritual Master He glanced at him and said, "What do you know? Since I'm here to be the bad guy. If I don't cut the Gordian knot and settle this matter quickly, I'm afraid there won't be a conclusion even when the 16 sects compete. Just take it as a reminder to her. If she doesn't know what's good for her, then there's no need to care about her feelings." Lu Sheng bowed his head and said, "Master is right." Spiritual Master He patted his shoulder and said, "That Dan Huizhen is a core formation cultivator after all. Peng Yuan's sect is He Zhangmin's direct disciple. If you can become Dao companions with her, it won't be an injustice to you. After that, you can find a way to take over the startling Heavenly Palace, which will be a great merit. If you don't like it in the future, you can just find another one." Lu Sheng hurriedly expressed his thoughts and said, "Master, please understand. Your disciple is wholeheartedly cultivating and doesn't have the mind to think about such things. I'm already satisfied as long as I can share Master's worries." Spiritual Master He glanced at him and said, "I hope you really think so." With a flick of his sleeve, he used his escape technique and took Lu Xing away through the clouds. At this time, inside the cabin, after Mu Bingxin read the letter, she was so angry that her whole body trembled. She scolded, "Taihao School has gone too far. They've gone too far." The contents of the letter made her extremely angry. First, it proposed that as long as Lu Sheng and Dan Huizhen became Dao companions, he could help Peng Yuan's sect get through this difficult time. This was reasonable. However, there was a precondition for this, and that was that He Zhangmin had to step down and let Dan Huizhen take over as the sect master. How could Mu Bingxin not see the wishful thinking in this? If Dan Huizhen became the sect master, the Morning Shock Heavenly Palace would definitely be under her control. If Lu Sheng borrowed this treasure, it would be perfectly justifiable. This kind of person and treasure could both be obtained by Taihao School. She secretly gritted her teeth and slammed the table, saying, "Taihao School, even though my Peng Yuan sect is small, we don't need to act according to your wishes." She turned around and ordered the maidservant beside her, "Go inform Huizhen that she's not allowed to go out and walk around for the next 2 days. Also, she's not allowed to see outsiders." The maidservant could see that she was in a bad mood, so she answered while trembling with fear and hurriedly went out. Mu Bingxin put her hand on her forehead and frowned in thought. After a full 2 hours, she had already made a decision. She got up and left the cabin, riding the clouds and arriving at Zhang Yan's resting place in a flash. She said, "Zhenren Zhang, Mu Bingxin has something to discuss with you. I wonder if it's convenient for you to meet." After a while, Zhang Yan walked out and cupped his hands, saying, "So it's Elder Mu. I've been impolite. Please come in and take a seat." Mu Bingxin secretly said, although Zhenren Zhang is from a large sect, he doesn't like to put on airs. She bowed and walked into the inner room. The two of them sat down and said seriously, "Zhenren Zhang, I have a favor to ask of you." Zhang Yan said in surprise, "Oh? Zhenren Mu, please speak." Mu Bingxin handed over the letter. "Zhenren Zhang, please take a look." After reading the letter, Zhang Yan sighed slightly in his heart. No matter what, Mu Bingxin was still the Grand Supreme Elder of Penyuan sect. Even the sect leader didn't dare to insult her, but Taoist he clearly didn't take her seriously. This was the sorrow of a small sect. The sect was not strong, so they could only rely on others. If he had joined such a sect back then, even if he had gone through untold hardships and reached his current cultivation level, he still wouldn't have been able to win the favor of a disciple of a large sect. He closed the letter and said in a deep voice, "How does fellow Taoist want I to help you?" Mu Bingxin bit her lip and said, "The disciple that my junior martial sister is most proud of is Martial Ni Stan. She will definitely inherit the position of sect leader in the future. I heard that fellow Taoist Zhang has a fifth disciple, Jiang Zheng, who is outstanding in character and appearance, as noble and pure as bamboo. If fellow Taoist agrees, the two of them can become Tao companions and cultivate together." After saying that, her fingers tightly grasped the hem of her clothes and she looked at Zhang Yan with a slightly nervous expression. This matter was suspected of using Qinsong school to avoid a disaster. Rather than hiding it, it was better to lay it out and say it out loud. That way, he could still be upright. Zhang Yan pondered for a while, thinking about the pros and cons. He didn't care much about Taihao school. This sect had a good relationship with Nanhua sect and was originally at odds with Qinsong school. It didn't matter even if he offended them. However, since Dan Huizhen was going to inherit the position of sect leader of Penyuan sect, if the two of them became Tao companions, Jiang Zheng would definitely not be able to cultivate in Clear Nether Heavenly Lake in the future. As his master, if he made the decision for him like this, it would be unfair to him. Thus, he said, "I have no objections to this matter. It's just that I have never interfered with the private matters of my disciples. After we return, I can send my disciple to Penyuan sect to stay for 2 days. Whether or not he succeeds will be up to him." When Mu Bingxin heard this, she was half happy and half worried, but there was still a trace of hope. Her heart relaxed a little. She thought for a moment, then said in a low voice, "Taoist Zhang, Taoist he." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and waved his sleeve. He said, "If he comes to force fellow Taoist, feel free to let him come find me. I will explain it to him." Chapter 499. He Mulong fished on Longxing Island every day, even leisurely. He originally thought that it wouldn't be long before Mu Bingxin would obediently give in and come looking for him. But after waiting for 3 days, there was no movement. He couldn't help but feel a little strange, so he called Lu Sheng over and said, "Disciple, go find out if Mu Bingxin has done anything recently." Lu Sheng accepted the order and left, but after a moment he returned on a ray of light. After landing he reported, "Master, something is wrong. I heard that Elder Mu has defeated many demonic cultivators in the past few days, and after visiting a few large clans in the inner sea this morning, she returned to Penyuan sect." He Mulong frowned. Mu Bingxin's resistance and evasions were all within his expectations, but she didn't care about him at all. This reaction was a little strange, as if she really had something to rely on. Thinking of this, he couldn't sit still any longer. However, just as he stood up, he slowly sat back down. Stroking his beard, his eyes flickered, and he said, "Lu Sheng, go capture someone for me." Lu Sheng cupped his hands. "Please tell me, master." He Mulong whispered a few words in his ear, and Lu Sheng nodded, bowed, and said, "Disciple will go now." Finished speaking, he leaped into a ray of light, looked up at the sky, and fled. He Mulong sat in the same place for another 10 minutes, then just now shouted and flew towards the sea. In less than 2 hours, he could already see a ship sailing in front of him. Summoning his transcendence energy, he leaped forward and blocked the ship's path. He then pointed downwards and sent out a stream of Gang Qi to intercept the ship's bow. He shouted, "Elder Mu, please come out and meet me." A ray of white light flew out from the boat and stopped in front of He Mulong. Then, the light dissipated and Mu Bingxian's lotus feet stepped on the clouds, standing in the blue sky. Her attitude was very cold as she said, "So it's spiritual master He. Why did you call out to me?" Zhenren He frowned and said, "Elder Mu, did you not read the letter that the old Taoist gave you?" Mu Bingxin said in a slightly mocking tone. This seat has already read the letter, but this seat feels that spiritual master He's suggestion is not appropriate, so let's just forget about it. Jinren He observed Jinren Mu's words and expressions. From Jinren Mu's attitude, he could sense that there was a change in the situation. Therefore, Jinren Mu was not afraid of the threat of Taihao School. He pondered inwardly and felt that this was not a good time to push her too hard, so he softened his tone and said, Junior Sister Mu, for the past 1,000 years, without the protection of my Taihao School, I'm afraid that Pingyuan sect would have long been wiped out. Moreover, the disciples of our two sects, Mi-Zi, have mostly married each other. Now that the devil tribulation has begun, we should go through the difficulties together. If Junior Sister Mu has any concerns, you can tell me. I understand. Reverend Mu raised his willowy eyebrows and shouted, Are you saying I've wronged the sect? What a joke. It's true that your Taihao School and my Pingyuan sect have a good friendship, but that's a thing of the past. For the past 100 years, all the talented disciples of my sect, Mi-Zi, have been begged by your Taihao School to be Taoist companions. In the past 100 years, only 3 of them have achieved the Dan transformation. Do you think that I don't know what your Taihao School is planning? Don't think that everyone in the world is stupid. You're just afraid that one of my Pingyuan sect will be able to achieve the cave, completely refine the startling heavenly palace, and master the celestial fire's 6 imperial justice technique, surpassing your Taihao School. Halfway through her words, Jinren He's expression changed drastically. He was caught off guard that Jinren Mu would actually announce such a secret. If it was overheard by someone, or if it flowed into the ears of the 6 devil sects, it would be very disadvantageous to Taihao School. Therefore, he roared angrily, Shut up! His roar was like a rolling thunder, stirring up the waves below and also suppressing the second half of Jinren Mu's words. At this time, in the cabin of the ship, Priest Su and Zhang Yan were sitting opposite each other. Hearing this, Priest Su chuckled and said, Immortal Mu, you must have said this on purpose for fellow Taoists to hear. Zhang Yan shook his head and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist Mu is worrying too much. Since I've agreed to take on this matter, I won't give up halfway. Even if I don't have this Taoist technique, I'll still help her. Outside, He Mulong repeatedly tried to persuade Mu Bingxin and said all kinds of good words, but he still couldn't persuade Mu Bingxin to change her mind. It was also because he had pressured her too much earlier, which caused Mu Bingxin to have a bad impression of him. In addition, with Zhang Yan as her backer, the two sides were gradually drifting apart, and there was no longer any possibility of reconciliation. He Mulong secretly said, If that's the case, then don't blame me for not giving him face. For now, the only thing I can do is to put more pressure on him. His face darkened and said, Jinren Mu, since you don't want to turn back, then it's up to you. Let's put this matter aside for now and talk about another matter. That day, I saw you hanging out with the devil sect's disciple Lao Zi. How do you explain this matter? Mu Bingxin was baffled and said, I'm Pingyuan's grand elder Lao Zi, why would I collude with the devil sect? He Mulong, this excuse of yours is too bad. He Mulong let out a deep smile and said, When my disciple brings him here, let's see if you'll admit it or not. Mu Bingxin said angrily, Fine, let's see what tricks you can come up with. The two waited for the time it took to eat a meal, and suddenly, a streak of light came from the south. Mu Bingxin looked up and saw that the person who came was He Mulong's disciple, Lu Sheng. It was just that he was carrying a person under his armpit. Upon closer inspection, it was Tong Ao. She was startled at first, but then she sneered. When Lu Sheng arrived in front of the two, he bowed to He Mulong and said, Master, the person has been caught. He Mulong nodded and said in a deep voice, Did you ask about this person's background? Lu Sheng said loudly, Master, disciple has asked. This person's cultivation technique was originally passed down by the 6 divine sections. Disciple was afraid of wrongly accusing a good person, so I asked some other people. They all said that this person's whereabouts are suspicious and he is familiar with the secrets of various sections. He is extremely suspicious. He Mulong's eyes focused on Tong Ao and said, Do you have anything to say? Tong Ao couldn't help but shiver. He thought to himself, if I don't admit it, I'm afraid that this person will immediately kill me. He showed a bitter smile to Mu Bingxin and nodded, saying, what Priest Lu said is true. He Mulong looked at Mu Bingxin and snorted. That day, my disciple already saw that this person is from the demonic sect. It's laughable that you, Elder Mu, still came forward to stop him. I don't know the reason. Mu Bingxin coldly said, He Mulong, this person's name is Tong Ao. He has indeed practiced some devil sect's secret techniques, but he has never harmed anyone's life. If you think I'm related to the devil sect, then so be it. Let's see if you have the ability. He Mulong raised his voice and said, Enlightened Master Mu, I also don't believe that you, Elder Mu, would do such a thing. However, with the demonic tribulation approaching, we can't be careless. This matter must be clarified. Elder Mu, please follow me back to Taihao School. If Elder Mu and Elder Mi are really innocent, I will personally go to Penyuan faction to ask for forgiveness. Mu Bingxin laughed angrily. He Mulong, if you want to make a move, why do you need to find so many excuses? You speak righteously as if the reason is all on your side. No wonder people say that you are thick-skinned and black-hearted. You are truly shameless. Make your move. I, Mu Bingxin, am not afraid of you at all. He Mulong, however, turned a deaf ear to her. He really just wanted an excuse to make a move. He had already asked around and found out that Dan Huizhen was also on this big ship. Once he dealt with this elder Penyuan faction and brought Mizi back to the sect, his disciple and Dan Huizhen would be together. At that time, even if the sect master of Penyuan faction disobeyed, it would be impossible. Mu Bingxin said that he was black-hearted, and it was not false at all. When he did things, he only sought to achieve his goal. Those ordinary principles and rules could not restrain him. He Mulong let out a shout and shook his body. A stream of green mist that looked like a water cloud rose from the top of his head. Light appeared in the mist and smoke appeared in the light. Soon after, 3 lumps of strong clouds surged in the sky. Streaks of smoke hung down like willow branches, enshrouding and faintly discernible. Mu Bingxin's expression froze. She took a step back and cried out in surprise, second layer of Yuaning? She immediately understood why He Mulong was confident in taking her down. It turned out that he had already reached the second layer of Yuaning. When cultivators of similar cultivation levels fought, apart from a battle of life and death, it was very difficult to determine the victor, let alone capture the other party. Naturally, those with treasures were not an exception. However, even if He Mulong had any treasures on him, Mu Bingxin, as the sect's grand elder, Elder Mi, also had 2 treasures that she could take out, so she was not afraid at all. But now that she saw He Mulong's cultivation level, she did not dare to be careless. She formed a hand seal and a 6-colored cloud floated above her head. Within the cloud, a fierce aura of weapons appeared. Although she was a woman, her cultivation technique was fierce and overbearing. He Mulong smiled proudly and said, Elder Mi, take a look at what this is. The 3 clouds shuddered before a round seed suddenly emerged from the cloud at the center. The seed was plump and resembled a green jade pearl, but there was a hint of purple aura swirling within it. Light was flashing from within the seed, and the sound of thunderclaps could be heard indistinctly. Mu Bingxin took a few glances at it. Even though she was standing in the same place, she felt her whole body go numb as if a lightning python was coiling around her. She seemed to have thought of something and suddenly, a look of fear appeared on her face. She blurted out, could this be the purple jade sun seed? You even managed to refine this? He Mulong laughed loudly and said, Since my grandmaster, it has come to Doran's generation. Just now, I have managed to refine this seed. I was planning to send it to the sword competition of the 16 sects with my martial nephew, but if Elder Mi isn't willing to come with me, I'll have to use it on you first. Mu Bingxin's heart sank. Others might not know how powerful this seed was, but she did. This purple jade sun seed was a precious seed produced by the divine tree that guarded the Taihao School. It was said that if one could refine 81 seeds and then refine them with 9 Taoist paradises, they would be able to form a formation that could shock the heavens and the earth and make the gods weep. However, this tree only bore one fruit every 1,000 years, and one fruit only bore 3 seeds. In the 4,000 years since the establishment of the Thai House School, they had only obtained 12 seeds. Not to mention those that were lost or stolen, it was unknown how long it would take to gather all of them. But even so, with just one seed here, it wasn't something that she could defend against. Although this treasure couldn't be considered a true artifact, it could easily kill a Yuanian cultivator with one strike. Mu Bingxin originally thought that if she could settle the matter with the Peyuan sect herself, there would be no need to ask Zhang Yan for help. Otherwise, she would owe him a favor for nothing. But now, it seemed that she had no choice but to ask for help, so she said, "Is fellow Taoist Zhang here? This isn't something that I can deal with." Chapter 500. Mu Bingxin was calling for help, and just as Zhang Yan was about to get up, Taoist Su stopped him and said, "Mannerhead, I've heard of the violet jade sun seed. It's not an ordinary item, so you don't have to take the risk yourself. Let me test it out first." Zhang Yan chuckled and glanced at the yellow smoke in the cabin, saying, "Fellow Taoists Su and Zhang are now my guests. Are you going to sit back and do nothing?" Taoist Su was startled, saying, "Does Mannerhead want us to deal with this person together?" Zhang Yan said matter-of-factly, "Why not?" He wasn't an inflexible person and only fought one-on-one. Previously, he was alone, so he often had to fight alone. But now that he had Taoist Su and Taoist Zhang by his side, why would he fight alone? Of course, he would fight together and deal with it together. Zhang Boyun, who was in the corner, revealed himself and laughed wildly. "Fellow Taoist, your words are right on my nerves." Taoist Su lowered his head and thought for a moment, then also laughed, saying, "It seems I was wrong." He stood up and shook his sleeves, saying excitedly, "Then I'll go with Mannerhead to meet this expert from Thai House School." Zhang Yan waved his hand, saying, "There's no rush, let I call Lao Ren over first." When he was on the ship, most of the places he went to were places where cultivation sects gathered. This dragon carp only needed to move its body slightly to stir up trouble, so it wasn't suitable to follow him around. Zhang Yan did not restrain him, and allowed him to go deep into the sea. However, since he had decided to take action, he would do his best. The strength of this monster was not to be underestimated, and he could not be cast aside. Naturally, he had to call him back to help. Taoist Su's expression was a bit strange. The dragon carp old monster's cultivation was almost comparable to a third-layer Yuanian cultivator. Adding the 3 of them and Mu Bingxin to deal with Taoist it seemed a bit like the strong bullying the weak. Outside, Mu Bingxin called out for help, but there was no response for a long time. She became anxious and thought to herself, could it be that fellow Taoist Zhang saw the violet jade sun seed and is unwilling to come out? Alas, you can't blame him. This treasure is extraordinary. If it was me, I wouldn't be willing to take such a risk. He Mulong also had the same thought. He couldn't help but ridicule in his tone as he teased, "Elder Mu, why don't I see that person coming out? He must be an unreliable person. If you agree to Doran's conditions, then today, you will be able to get rid of him. Let's treat it as if it never happened. Otherwise, you can follow me back to the sect." While he was speaking, the sea waves suddenly surged. Demonic clouds gathered between the sky and the sea, the wind was fierce, and the rain was heavy. A clear and melodious dragon roar was heard. Not more than 1,000 feet away, the sea waves shot up like pillars, and water splashed up into the sky. From the bottom of the sea, a dragon-headed fish body monster emerged. Faintly discernible black clouds surrounded its body, and its feet climbed on top of the clouds, staring down at him from above. He Mulong only took a glance and felt a wave of fear. He immediately saw through the origin of this monster. Feeling the waves of demonic wind that constantly rushed over, he immediately knew that this monster's cultivation was above his own. His heart sank, and he suddenly felt that the person he had to deal with was far from as simple as he had previously thought. At this moment, a gust of wind swirled in front of him, and a tall and straight black-robed Taoist appeared, standing 20 feet away from him with his hands behind his back. He Mulong didn't even have time to assess clearly when he suddenly felt a miserable wind behind him. Turning his head to look, he caught a glimpse of a dusky yellow turbid smoke spiraling behind him. His face instantly turned unsightly. At this time, Mu Bingxin also floated over and stood on his left with a solemn expression. He Mulong's gaze looked around. Although he couldn't see Taoist Su with his naked eyes, he felt that there were more people in the field than in front of him. He immediately felt that something was wrong. Even though he had a treasure in his hands, he was only one person. Now that he was surrounded by several Yuanying realm cultivators, he was panicking in his heart and immediately thought of retreating. With that thought in mind, he shouted and activated his technique, turning into a green light that shot up and went to a high place. However, after jumping for more than 10 miles, he wanted to go up again, but he could no longer. At this time, he was shocked to find that this side of the world was actually sealed. He circled around again, and then gave up. He returned to his original position with a dark face, and said to Zhang Yan, "Taoist friend really used a good method. I see that you have a clear spirit Taoist aura. You should also be a person of my Xianmen, but you're mixed with evil demons. Do you dare to report your name?" Zhang Yan smiled slightly, and cupped his hands, saying, "I'm Qinsong Zhang Yan." He Mulong stared at him without blinking and said sternly, "You're Zhang Yan." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "That's right." He Mulong actually laughed out loud and said, "Good, good. Today, you should run into Doran's hands, and the trouble you caused back then should be settled." Back then, Nanhua Sec's Taihao School had a total of 3 Yuanying Zhenren working together to seize the divine abode in Tao Zhenren's hands. It was Zhang Yan who obstructed them, causing them to fall into the enemy's hands, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Other than that, there was also an outstanding disciple, He Jiao, who also died under his sword. If he wasn't a disciple of Qinsong School, and Taihao School couldn't do anything to him, he wouldn't have let it go so easily. If he Mulong could escape, he wouldn't care about this, but now that his escape route was blocked, new and old hatred couldn't help but surge up in his heart. Zhang Yan was a little curious. This Daoran just now clearly showed signs of escaping, but at this moment he suddenly became tough. Was he pretending to find a chance to escape, or did he really have some confidence? He Mulong knew that he couldn't escape, so he cut off his thoughts and focused on dealing with the great enemy in front of him. He first opened up his own treasure light with all his strength, and then summoned a green smoke to cover his body. After that, he let out a shout, and the jade jasper purple sun seed, hanging above his head trembled, and shot towards where Zhang Yan was standing. Zhang Yan just now heard this person say that this treasure seed was originally going to be given to his martial nephew to go to the 16 Sects Dharma Assembly, and he was afraid that Taihao School didn't just have one, so he wanted to test the treasure's ability. Thus, he didn't dodge, but used his mind to summon all kinds of treasures. In an instant, light surged, flashing dazzlingly. The longevity-locking sun cicada, the 5-gate white carp shuttle, and the earth-splitting heaven and earth leaf, these 3 profound weapons, all flew out at the same time. After the longevity-locking sun cicada came out, it immediately turned into a ray of clear light and charged towards the treasure seed. But before it got close, the treasure seed suddenly emitted a ring of faint purple light. With a rumble, it seemed to explode the void, and actually shook the cicada away. At this time, the 5-spirit white carp shuttle also arrived, and fiercely pecked down. But when it came into contact with the ring of purple light, it was like it was struck by lightning, trembling as it was bounced back 1,000 feet. Zhang Yan reached out with his hand, and immediately, a curtain of golden light descended from the heaven and earth leaf, blocking in front of him. The jade jasper purple sun seed directly collided with it, and there was a loud sound that shook the air, as if a bronze bell had been rung in the sky. The golden light actually shattered in an instant, and the heaven and earth leaf also floated slowly, spinning as it was shaken several miles away. After the golden light shattered, Zhang Yan only felt that the purple light was still surging towards him, but he noticed that the treasure seed seemed to be completely unharmed, but the ring of purple light was slightly dimmer than it was just now, and was far less powerful than before. Thus, he didn't dodge, and with a light shout, the treasured robe on his body automatically emitted a 3-foot-long light, which turned into a gentle force that protected his body, and he dodged far away. Zhang Yan secretly thought to himself, "It's fine to deal with one seed, but if this He Mulong had two and attacked from the front, then I could only temporarily avoid the limelight. If he had 3 or even 4, even if a cultivator of the 3rd grade of Yuanying was here, he could only retreat." However, there were many magical treasures in the world, and none of them could be completely advantageous. He already knew in his heart that the next time he encountered such a powerful magical treasure, he only needed to use his sword to dodge. Even if the power of this item was great, it would be useless if it couldn't hit him. Taoist Su attached himself to the invisible Yin blade and kept looking for an opportunity to make a move. But after a few rounds, he found that He Mulong was indeed worthy of being a Xianmen cultivator who had cultivated for nearly 1,000 years. Even if he made a move, he would still use the protective treasure light on his body tightly, and the protection was like a turtle shell, without the slightest flaw. And within the treasure light, there was also a wisp of light green smoke that floated behind him. It should also be a protective treasure. If he was alone and waited for his blade to slash, it would only expose his location, and he might not be able to hurt this person in the slightest. But now there were at least 4 Yuanying cultivators surrounding him, so how could he care so much? Seeing that He Mulong had used the jade jasper purple sun seed, he immediately poured his entire body into the invisible Yin blade, brazenly slashing at the protective treasure light. Zhang Boyan was also very dourn. He knew that this kind of cultivator who fell into a predicament was most afraid of being forced, otherwise it would be difficult to avoid a life and death struggle, and that would be a great loss. Thus, he didn't rush forward to attack, but instead wandered around He Mulong's body, waiting for an opportunity to make a move. At this moment, seeing that Taoist Su had suddenly used a killing move, he was no longer polite. From his 7 apertures, turbid nether energy gushed out, covering He Mulong's entire body. Mu Bingxin saw that someone was making a move, and after a slight hesitation, the astral cloud above her turned, and with a series of chi-chi sounds, tens of thousands of condensed fiend arrows flew out, attacking. In an instant, 3 Yuanying cultivators attacked at the same time. He Mulong sensed danger, and before he could recall the jade jasper purple sun seed, he dodged. Dragon Carp Siren had been watching from the side, so how could it give him this opportunity? It swung its carp tail, and a fishy wind rose, slapping horizontally towards He Mulong. Seeing this, Zhang Yan smiled slightly, and with a flick of his finger, more than 10 drops of Yin heavy water flew out, blocking He Mulong's path. This move couldn't hurt this person, but as long as it blocked him, it would be considered to have achieved its goal. The 4 humans and 1 demon attacked at the same time, and it was like a heaven-encompassing net had enveloped down, causing He Mulong to be utterly unable to dodge. In the blink of an eye, the protective treasure light around him exploded like fireworks, and the light green smoke within him only lasted for a short moment before collapsing, causing him to let out a shrill cry as he fell into the ocean below. And that jade jasper purple sun seed lost its master's control, paused in the air for a moment, and then turned around, breaking through the binding of heaven and earth, and rushed out. Taoist Su, relying on his speed, originally wanted to use the Yin knife to chase after this treasure, but just as he started to move, Zhang Yan stretched out his hand to stop him, and shook his head, saying, "This thing seems to have a seal cast by the people of Dongtian. It can't be caught, there's no need to chase." Chapter 501. When Lu Sheng saw He Mulong fall into the sea, he panicked. He was only at the mystic light realm, and he could only hide far away from the Yuanying cultivators. Right now, the only thought left in his mind was to escape. However, just now Tong Ao, who was being held under his armpit, said, "Taoist Lu, if you want to live, don't go." For Lu Sheng to be chosen as a disciple by He Mulong, he was not a simple person. Hearing this, he paused for a moment and almost instantly realized what was going on. He sighed and thought to himself, "Where can I hide in front of the true immortals?" He let go of Tong Ao and cupped his hands. Thank you, Taoist Tong, for the reminder. Just now, I can't go against my master's orders. Tong Ao shook his body and summoned a ray of mystic light. He stretched out his leg and stood on the ground. Then, he tidied up his wrinkled clothes and said with a smile, "Not at all. Even if I didn't say it, fellow Taoist Lu would have thought of it." At this moment, a colorful cloud flew over and landed in front of the two. Mu Bingxin waved the cloud away and walked out. She looked at Lu Sheng, who was forcing himself to stay calm, and sneered. "At least you know what's good for you." Without another word, he waved his sleeve and released a 5-colored silk handkerchief. He spun it above Lu Sheng and Tong Ao's heads, wrapping them up and putting them into the fragrance pouch. Then, he rode the colorful cloud and returned to the big ship in a flash. After she landed, she looked around and saw He Mulong lying on the deck. His hair was messy and his body was wet. He looked half dead. Just now, He Mulong was heavily injured and had fallen into the water, but he wasn't dead yet because of his strong foundation. Zhang Yan saw Mu Bingxin turn around and said, "Taoist Mu, I'll leave this Hezhen to you. Kill him or let him go, it's up to you." Mu Bingxin didn't say anything. She knew very well that she had offended He Mulong too much today. Even if she let him go, he would come back to make things difficult for her the next day. It was better to just kill him and end it all. When she thought up to here, she gritted her teeth and shouted out fiercely, causing a baleful blade to fly out from the strong cloud above her, and it swiftly slashed down. With a swish, it severed He Mulong's head, and then she flicked her sleeve to toss out a silk handkerchief to put away his true spirit. Mu Bingxin closed her eyes and took half a step back. She took a deep breath and opened her eyes again just now. Once this person died, they would cut off their path of retreat and completely break off their relationship with Taihao School. However, now that the demonic calamity had arrived, without the protection of a large sect, the Pingyuan sect would most likely not be able to avoid it. Since the Supreme Sky sect was unreliable, it was better to side with the Dark Azure sect. However, her only worry was that if the matter of Dan Huizhen and Zhang Yan's 5th disciple didn't come to an agreement, then where would the Pingyuan sect go? Zhang Yan originally thought that Mu Bingxin would hesitate, but he didn't expect her to be so resolute. He couldn't help but nod in his heart and say, "Fellow Taoist Mu, even if my disciple and your martial nephew can't come to fruition, I'll definitely try to convince senior brother Hua so that your Pingyuan sect doesn't suffer a calamity." Hearing Zhang Yan's words, Mu Bingxin's heart calmed down. Her eyes filled with gratitude as she bowed and said, "Then this servant will thank senior brother Zhang in advance." Although the Taihao School had 4 mansions and 3 mountains, only the Grand Metropolis Mountain had 3 Grotto Heaven Realm True Realm cultivators. Whether it was the school's foundation or the powerful cultivators in the school, it couldn't compare to the Qinsong School, which had existed for tens of thousands of years. However, the strength that Zhang Yan displayed today was enough to compete with the Purple Bamboo Mountain where He Mulong was. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, don't be in a hurry to thank me. There's still one more thing that needs to be dealt with." Mu Bingxin asked in a low voice, "What is it? Please tell me, senior brother." Zhang Yan said, "Although He Mulong is dead, I expect that the flying treasure seed will definitely alarm the Taihao School. In a moment, there will definitely be people coming to investigate. I can help you block them first. After that, you need to quickly lead your disciples back to the sect. Don't come out unless my Qinsong School comes to join the meeting." Mu Bingxin couldn't help but feel a chill in her heart. She said solemnly, "This servant understands. I'll listen to senior brother Zhang's instructions." Zhang Yan nodded, then turned around and said to Zhang Boyan, "Fellow Taoist, why don't you hide yourself first?" He had the upper hand when he besieged He Mulong. Of course, he wasn't afraid that Zhang Boyan's identity would be seen through. However, if someone from the Taihao School came to negotiate later, he would have to first hide his weakness, lest he fall into the hands of others. Zhang Boyan snorted and tapped his feet. He immediately turned into a wisp of smoke and disappeared into the cabin of the ship. Zhang Yan's judgment was not wrong at all. After about a quarter of an hour, the clouds in the sky suddenly surged, and a gap was split open. 2 streaks of light with astonishing auras flew down from the gap. As they got closer, He could clearly see that they were two Taoists, a man and a woman. The male Taoist looked to be in his 50s. His sideburns were slightly white, and he had a powerful appearance. He was tall and strong, wore a greenish-gray Taoist robe, and his eyes were bright and full of spirit. Behind him was a middle-aged Taoist. She had a kind face, and her eyes were clear. However, at this moment, both of them had a slightly serious expression. The middle-aged Taoist nun Zhang Yan also knew her. She was Qin Yaozi from the Taihao School's Purple Bamboo Mountain Training Hall. In order to sneak into Mount Qingsuan to obtain the Ichi Ganoderma, he had changed his name to Li Yuanba, and it was from this person that he obtained the mountain entry talisman. However, when Mu Bingxin saw the Daoren, her expression changed drastically. She took a few steps towards Zhang Yan and said in a trembling voice, "Senior brother Zhang, you have to be careful. That's Elder Hong Yuanzhong, the person with the highest cultivation in the Purple Bamboo Mountain Training Hall. Rumor has it that he has cultivated to the 3rd layer of Yuaning." Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed slightly. He had also fought with a 3rd layer of Yuaning before. Seeing the surging spiritual energy on Elder Hong's body, this feeling was also very familiar, so he knew that the rumor was 80% true. Elder Hong's gaze was as sharp as a torch, and with a glance, he saw He Mulong's corpse on the boat. Monstrous rage instantly appeared in his eyes, and he actually didn't say a word as he formed a seal and pointed downwards. In an instant, thunder rumbled and lightning flashed like golden snakes slithering about, and a ball of lightning net spread out in the horizon, almost enveloping the sea within a radius of 1,000 feet. Then he roared, his voice resounding through the sky, "Who killed my junior brother? Give me your life." He shook his shoulder, and a thick blue cloud rose above his head. From within the cloud, thousands of green wooden swords appeared, all of them half a foot long. The swords were surrounded by lightning, and they made swishing sounds as they struggled. With a turn of his cultivation method, all of the wooden swords were activated, and they fell down like a rain of arrows. Elder Hong saw that Zhang Yan was standing in the middle of the boat, so he should be the person in charge. Therefore, most of the attacks were directed towards him. Su Daojin saw those thunder swords and could not help but exclaim, "Jade Brilliance Thunderwood swords? This Daoren is so fierce." His eyes were filled with fear. These thunder swords were refined from the heavenly thunder dipper and the divine wood's green branches. Once they came close, it did not matter if you hid yourself or not. As long as there was qi activity in the surroundings, it would immediately gather and attack. Most Dao techniques that could conceal one's tracks would not be able to hide under this method. When this wave of attacks landed, thunder and lightning crackled in the sky, and flashes of light flashed. It could be said that it was impressive. If it was before, Zhang Yan could only retreat first and then think of a way to counterattack. But now, he was not here alone. Therefore, he did not move and only said, "Where is Shi Ren? Quickly come and protect your master." Just as he finished speaking, a dragon roar sounded, and the sea below surged. The dragon carp's 1,000-feet-long body scuttled out of the water, and it lowered its head. Its pair of red coral-like jade horns slanted towards the sky, and a mass of dark clouds gathered continuously. In the blink of an eye, it expanded to the size of a few acres. Not only did it envelop itself, it also enveloped the entire sea boat behind it. Su Daojin was just worrying about how to deal with the Thunderwood swords, and was overjoyed when he saw this. He quickly turned his body, and wanted to hide in the clouds. However, just now that he was near, he felt a force attacking him, and he could not help but be stunned. The dragon carp glanced at him and snorted. Su Daojin instantly understood. He had offended this dragon carp with his words earlier, and this great demon was rather vengeful. Now that it had come back for revenge, Su Daojin could also adapt to circumstances. He immediately put down his pride, and apologized in a low voice. Hearing his soft pleading, the dragon carp flicked its tail fin, and a hint of pride appeared in its turtle eyes. Only then did it open the door and let him in. At this moment, the Thunderwood swords fell one after another, and they tore apart the high clouds released by the dragon carp like cloth. However, This was the old demon's 1,000 years of cultivation to protect its body. Even if the tribulation thunder came, it could still withstand a few strikes. Those thunder swords also advanced like a hurricane in the beginning, but after a few hundred feet, they lost their strength. Taoist Nun Qingyao stood on the cloud with a horsetail whisk in her hand. She saw everything clearly and she sighed. "Senior Martial Brother, please stop. That dragon carp has at least 1,000 years of cultivation, and its cultivation is at the same level as yours. If it's not a battle of life and death, the outcome will not be determined in a short period of time." Hong Yuanzhong seemed to be hot-tempered, but he was also very meticulous. Just now, he purposely did not ask about Zhang Yan and the others' background, because he was afraid that it would be difficult to make a move. Now that he had tested the waters, and seeing that he still could not deal with them, and hearing Taoist Nun Qingyao's words, he took advantage of the situation and stopped his technique. He summoned all the thunderwood swords, but he did not remove the thunder net that enveloped the heaven and earth. He said in a deep voice, "Which one of you is in charge? Come up and talk to Daoren." Zhang Yan took a step forward and went up to the dragon carp's back. The demon shrugged its body and soared into the sky. It reached the same height as the two of them, and just now it stopped. He cupped his fist and bowed. "I am Zhang Yan from Qinsong School. Greetings, fellow Taoists." Taoist Nun Qingyao quickly returned the greeting. "Greetings, fellow Taoists." Hong Yuanzhong snorted coldly. "So you're from Qinsong School. How did my junior martial brother he offend you to the point that you had to resort to such a vicious attack?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly. "There's a reason for this. Why don't we ask Pengyuan Sect's Mu Zhen to come up and explain it to us?" Pengyuan Sect. Hong Yuanzhong frowned. How could he not know what he Mulong was here for? That letter was personally written by him. However, he also knew what kind of person this junior martial brother was. He was afraid that he had used some sinister tricks again, which caused others to be unable to tolerate it anymore. That was why he asked for help, and in the end he lost his own sect. He flicked his sleeves and shouted, "There's no need for that. Junior martial brother, he was not skilled enough, so he lost to fellow Taoist Zhang. That was his own humiliation. However, as a disciple of Taihao School, we can't just let him die in vain. Daoren will personally go to Mystical Water True Palace to reason with Qi Yuntian. Fellow Taoist Zhang, just wait." Chapter 502. When Hong Yuanzhong threatened to reason with Qi Yuntian, Zhang Yan couldn't help but show some surprise. He said, "Jinren Hong and senior martial brother Qi are friends?" When Hong Yuanzhong saw the strange look on his face, he thought that he had taken his pulse. His eyes suddenly shone brightly and he bellowed, "Just you wait." After saying that, he stomped his feet, stepped on a cloud and soared to the sky. Taoist Nun Qingyao sighed and said, "Jinren Zhang, farewell." She lightly cast a spell, and a light smoke curled up, went up to the green jade, turned into the cloud, and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Mu Bingxin just clasped the magic weapon in her sleeve tightly, ready to fight the two Zenrens at any time. Seeing them leave, she relaxed just now. She rode the wind to Zhang Yan's side and said worriedly, "Senior martial brother Zhang." From Hong Yuanzhong's tone, he seems to be familiar with Jinren Qi. If Jinren Qi blames him, will there be any changes? She wasn't clear about the situation in Qinsong School. Although Zhang Yan promised her to stand up for Pengyuan faction in front of Huxian, Qi Yuntian was the third-generation eldest senior martial brother after all. Whether it was reputation or cultivation, his peers in the sect couldn't compare to him. If he stood up for Hong Yuanzhong, she didn't know if Zhang Yan could bear it. Zhang Yan thought for a moment, then smiled and said, "It's fine, let him be." Hong Yuanzhong might not be acquainted with Qi Yuntian, but he was one of the top 10 disciples of Qinsong School. It was impossible for Qi Yuntian to make things difficult for him for Taihao School. Although Pengyuan faction wasn't one of the top 10 sects, they at least had a Yuanying elder. If they could rope them in, it wouldn't be bad for Qinsong School. He believed that Qi Yuntian would also be able to see it, so he guessed that the matter would be left unsettled in the end. Zhang Yan didn't care much, but Mu Bingxin was worried. Her face showed some hesitation, as if she was considering an extremely difficult matter. After a while, she seemed to have made a decision. She sighed softly, raised her wrist, and took out a jade slip from her pouch. She gently removed the restrictions on it and held it up with both hands before Zhang Yan. She said, "Senior brother Zhang, this is the Celestial Fire's 6 Imperial Justice Technique. It was obtained by the ancestor of my sect from the heavenly palace of Starshock in the past. However, if you want to master this technique, you will need to rely on this treasure. Senior brother Zhang, why don't you bring your 5th disciple to have a look? If he likes it, he can come to my sect to cultivate. My Pengyuan sect will definitely treat him as a distinguished guest." Zhang Yan's eyebrows rose. It wasn't difficult to see through Mu Bingxin's intentions. She was afraid that Jiang Zheng wouldn't agree to become Dan Huizhen's Dao companion, so she took the initiative to take out this secret art in order to facilitate this matter. Since this technique was able to make Taihao School feel extremely fearful, it was obviously an extremely formidable Dao art, and it carried rather great weight. He thought for a moment before accepting it generously, and he said, "Then let's see if this disciple of mine is the fated one." When she saw that Zhang Yan didn't refuse it, Mu Bingxin instantly felt a sense of anticipation in the depths of her heart, and she forcefully pulled herself together and said, "When I return to the sect this time, I'll restrain my disciple according to Taoist master's instructions, and I'll go into seclusion." Zhang Yan nodded with a smile. Fellow Taoist Mu doesn't have to be too afraid of Taihao School. You have to know that the date of the sword competition between the 16 sects is approaching, and my profound school will definitely have a contest with the Devil sect. At this critical moment, Taihao School will definitely not make a big fuss over this and exhaust their strength. Taoist Mu only has to be vigilant, and she will definitely be fine. Mu Bingxin nodded in agreement. Penyuan's sect had been established for more than 1,000 years, and the mountain gate formation was enough to defend against strong enemies. As long as no one from the heavenly abode came to attack, they wouldn't be afraid of anyone. However, she also felt that it was a bit of a pity. The sword competition between the 16 sects was a rare event in Donghua continent, and she originally wanted to go and watch, but now that she had fallen out with Taihao School, this matter couldn't be done. Zhang Yan's feet tapped lightly on the ground, and he floated out of the big boat. He stepped onto the dragon carp's back, and he said, "Taoist Master Mu, I've troubled you for a few days, and I also need to return to the sect. I'll take my leave now." Mu Bingxin bowed and said, "Farewell, senior brother Zhang." Zhang Yan patted the dragon horn on the head of Shiren, and the demon let out a low roar. Then, it stirred up surging waves, and it headed towards Donghua continent. Priest Su and Zhang Boyan also flew out of the cabin, and they followed behind. In just a blink of an eye, 2 rays of light melted into the distant sky. Mu Bingxin looked at the place where the 3 of them disappeared, and she stood on the boat for a long time before she ordered the big boat to turn back in the direction of the sect. Because Zhang Yan's original position was not far from Donghua continent, after a few hours, the dragon carp crossed the inland sea and landed on land. Once it left the border, the demon absorbed a large amount of seawater, merged with the cloud fiend, and flew into the sky. Because Zhang Yan thought that the dragon carp's flight was too shocking, he ordered it to fly into the clouds. Because of the water clouds, even the cultivators with extraordinary eyesight could only see a ball of blue seawater in the sky, but they couldn't see what it was. After leaving the water, the dragon carp's flight speed was far slower than when it was on the sea. Priest Lu originally wanted to make fun of it, but he thought that this demon was very angry, and if he encountered any danger again, it would inevitably make him look bad, so he held back. Zhang Yan stood on the dragon carp's back with his hands behind his back, and he seemed to be thinking. This time, to go to the sword competition assembly, he not only wanted to bring Priest Su and Priest Zhang, but also Lu Mainyang, the great Yuaning demon. However, this woman was the wife of Elder Yen of the North Star sect, and it was hard to predict whether this trip would be good or bad, so he had to inform her to prevent any misunderstandings. Elder Yen and his wife were both perfected Yuaning, and it would be too indiscreet to send disciples, so he decided to pay a visit to the North Star sect before returning to the sect. After flying for half a day, Danyang Mountain, where the North Star sect was located, came into view. Zhang Yan slightly stomped his feet, and the dragon carp sensed his intention, crouched down and descended. The guarding elder of Danyang Mountain immediately noticed the movement in the sky. Two core formation cultivators stood behind the mountain guarding formation and looked up at the dragon carp in the rolling black clouds, shocked. One of them said in a low voice, "Senior brother, where did this great demon come from? Why is our North Star sect here?" The other person's expression was also very solemn. The wind around the dragon carp surged, and even though he was standing very far away, he could feel the great power contained in it, as if thousands of hectares of sea water were about to pour down. He said in a low voice, "Junior brother, send the message quickly." The first cultivator did not hesitate, and immediately waved his hand, and a silver sword was sent out. This message immediately alerted the sect leader of North Star sect, Jiang Lin. Not long after, he came out of the Yaojing restaurant in a flying carriage covered with a splendid canopy and accompanied by 5 balls of pure luck. Other than him, there were also 6 children on the carriage, and each of them was holding a shining magic artifact. At this time, another wind flew out from Zhujiang's hut, and it circled in the sky and arrived in a flash. Elder Yen dispersed the wind and went forward to "Greetings, sect leader." Jiang Lin did not have time for pleasantries and said in a low voice, "There seems to be a great demon outside the mountain. Elder Yen, come with me for a while." Elder Yen shook his head and said, "Since you don't know who it is, how can sect leader take the risk yourself? Please wait here, Darren will go check out the situation." Jiang Lin pondered for a moment and seemed to feel that Elder Yan's words were reasonable, so he did not insist and only said solemnly, "Martial Uncle Yen, since the 2 martial uncles of our sect passed away, only Martial Uncle has Yuanying cultivation base, and if they have evil intentions, do not fight them head-on. With the sect's restriction array, it will be fine." Elder Yen stroked his beard and said with a smile, "I am the sect leader, why don't you invite fellow Feng from Qinsong School to come with me?" Jiang Lin's eyes flashed, and he immediately told the child beside the carriage, "Take my order, and invite Taoist Feng here." The child bowed, accepted the order, and left on a flying shuttle. Not long later, a Taoist with a calm expression and slightly tanned skin came over on a smoke. He had already learned what had happened from the child, and first bowed to Jiang Lin, and then said to Elder Yen seriously, "Zhenren Yen, this matter should not be delayed, I will go with you. If there are really demons coming, I will definitely send a letter to Senior Brother Hua and ask for help, so that the North Star sect will not face the enemy alone." In the past 30 years, many sects in the north had benefited from Huaxian's strong support, but it was precisely because of this that they also had to guard the 4 sides of the Qinsong school and purge the demons and evildoers from the boundary. However, if they encountered a powerful cultivator that was difficult to deal with, the Qinsong school would also send people to help. Huaxian also ordered many disciples to be stationed in these sects, so that the Qinsong school could control the overall situation and gather the forces of the sects to fight against the enemy. Also, if there were any changes, they would be informed in time. The person stationed in the North Star sect was Elder Sun's disciple, Feng Ming. Elder Yen and Feng Ming went together, and they quickly arrived at the mountain gate. The 2 core formation cultivators immediately went up to them, pointed outside the mountain, and told them what they saw. From their words, Elder Yen could tell that they did not have any ill intentions, and his expressions softened a little. He said, "Martial nephews, please wait in the formation, I will go meet the person who came." The 2 left, and Elder Yen walked out of the formation. He suddenly saw the dragon carp covered in golden scales and had 2 horns on its head, and he could not help but be shocked. He had also been to the East Sea when he was young, and he could tell where this big demon came from at a glance. He thought to himself, "This old demon has been cultivating overseas for 1,000 years. Why is it here?" Looking at the situation, it seems to have been tamed by someone. He knew that the person who could tame the dragon carp was not someone he could deal with, so he did not go forward. He cupped his hands and said from 100 feet away, "I am the North Star sect's Yen Jingding, May I ask where you are from, and why have you come to my mountain gate? Laughter came from the dark clouds, and Zhang Yan came out with the wind. He cupped his hands and said, Elder Yan, how have you been? Elder Yan could not help but be startled. He looked at Zhang Yan up and down, and he seemed to be a little dazed. He casually sighed and returned the greeting with a smile. Please forgive me for my loss of composure. I think it has not been a few decades since we last met. You are already one of us. Feng Ming was also surprised to see that it was Zhang Yan who came. However, he had only stepped into the core formation realm for a little more than 10 years, so he could not tell what cultivation level Zhang Yan had. He only felt that his cultivation level was deeper than before. Hearing Elder Yan's words, it seemed that he had already stepped into the Yuaning realm. He could not help but reveal a look of disbelief. He originally wanted to greet him, but when he opened his mouth, he could not speak. Zhang Yan saw him and smiled. Junior brother Feng, why are you here? Feng Ming came back to his senses and hurriedly cupped his hands and said, Senior brother Zhang, I am under the order of Senior brother Hua to guard the North Star sect. Zhang Yan nodded and returned the greeting. He smiled and said, After many years, I did not expect Junior brother to have reached the core formation realm. Congratulations. However, Feng Ming's reaction was strange. He was silent for a while, and suddenly said, Senior brother Zhang, I have something to say to you alone. Elder Yan laughed and said, I still have a furnace of pills to make, so I will take my leave first. Take your time. He raised his hands and cupped his hands, then floated into the mountain gate. After he left, Feng Ming's eyes were a little complicated. He said, Senior brother Zhang, what are your plans this time? Zhang Yan looked at him and smiled indifferently. He said, Naturally, I will go to the sword competition of the 16 sects. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.